Okay, everyone. Thank you for joining. This will be, Be'ezrat Hashem, the final class on the series called The Birth of Moshiach. Whoever wants to dedicate this class, it's available. Okay, this is the fifth class in the series. I don't want to repeat most of what we learned. We're learning a passage in the Zohar with the commentary of the Alter Rebbe Reb Shneur Zalman of Liadi, the author of the Tanya. In his book, in his Sefer, really he's called the Son Sefer, but it's the discourses of his father, called Biurei Zohar. This is a passage of Zohar in Parshas Balak. We've been learning it for 4 classes. This is the 5th class. Now, not to be charged with deceptive advertisement, it's called the birth of Moshiach because there is a major idea in this discourse that spoke about the birth of Moshiach. We learned it in class number 2 and in class number 3 primarily. So if you look online and you look for the birth of Moshiach class 2 and class 3, you will have much more information on that. If that's what's intriguing you in this class, then that's what you're looking for. Today's class is not going to be talking about the birth of Moshiach, specifically highlighting that. So once that's understood, obviously all these 5 classes complement each other because they're all bringing forth, and it's one passage of the Zohar that we were studying, very cryptic and very mystical. And even though I'm teaching it, I had confessed that I understand very little about what I am teaching, but it's the teachings of these deep secrets of the Torah that bring light to the world, and I will dedicate the class for the safety of my brothers and sisters, our brothers and sisters in the land of Israel, that Moshiach should already appear, reveal himself, and all the darkness should dissipate, and all the pain and suffering. All the Jewish people should be safe. Those who need a refuah shalema, those who need a healing, those who are wounded should all have a complete and miraculous recovery. Those who sadly passed away should be already resurrected. The coming of Moshiach involves the resurrection as well. May they happen speedily, quickly. Now, that's what we can say about all of this. And now we're ready to learn. Okay, so we're in the middle. I don't expect people who are tuning in just to this class on its own to have much understanding what I'm talking about. In other words, let me put it this way. I'm limited in what I'm talking about even as the teacher, meaning these are very complicated ideas. That is number one. So those who are with me for the last 4 classes hopefully understand what we're learning, and maybe they understand it better than I do, which is beautiful. And those that are coming on just on today's class, if you're versed in these ideas beforehand, great. If not, I recommend spending the time first listening to the previous classes and then letting it flow into this, unless you're one of those beautiful souls that can just absorb godly spiritual ideas, not directly through organized, an organized buildup of intellectual grasp, but just through an infusion of spiritual light in your soul. That's beautiful. Okay. That being said, as the disclaimer before the class, let's go. So the verses, the psukim that we're talking about, the psukim are psukim in Parshas Balak, which is the prophecies of the fellow by the name of Balak, who was a Gentile prophet. But he brought down one of the because he was a prophet, he had great divine revelation, and particularly when he was summoned and hired to damage the Jewish people. Anti-Semites, it's been around. It didn't start in now. It's been around since way from the first Jew. We had, even before the first Jew was born, there was an anti-Semite. They were anti-Semites already. They tried to stop, the stargazers of Nimrod. They saw that someone was going to be born that was going to interfere with their pagan way of life. and they try to kill the baby, and the baby was born. The Midrash tells us the whole story. So, this already began back then. And then when Isaac was born, the first Jew to be born a Jew, Avram kind of converted by recognizing monotheism, belief in one God. Isaac Yitzchak was the first Jew to be born a Jew, and he was already. They wanted to claim that he's not a son of Abraham. That's so far they wanted to erase him from the beginning, from the start. So we had enemies all along. So when we see today's days people that when Israel is being attacked by thousands of rockets to civilized cities, and the media, and I don't know, thousands of people, you're talking about thousands of people, literally thousands, go on YouTube, not on YouTube, go anywhere, go on any of these sites, see how many people are siding with Hamas. It's so insane, it's so utterly insane. People that are shooting rockets into civilized areas without any differentiation if it kills men, women, or children, or an army that has to fight a war by knocking on buildings and telling everybody to leave before they bombard a place, and they have to do precision surgery, so you kill a terrorist who's hiding behind human shields. I mean, it is so insane. It's so ridiculous. And yet, they're all over. You're talking about half a world population that's pointing the finger to Israel. I don't know, maybe this is the differentiation between right before Moshiach comes, between those that are inherently good and those that are inherently evil. How can you stand and point to imagine living over here in California, in West Hollywood, where we live, and rockets coming, and no one knows. Anybody living in any home, no one knows if it's going to land. And there's no differentiation, because those that are shooting those rockets are not targeting this building or that building. They're just they're shooting weapons of death into populated areas. And when an army goes out to try to stop it, they're the children murderers. I mean, it is so despicable. It is so monstrous. But yet it's okay, because it's a hatred to the Jewish people. So it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't have to make any sense. It's irrational. It's insane. And it's really coming from a root that doesn't want the revelation of God in this world. That's all that it is. So obviously it's coming from a place of pure evil that does not want, because the Jewish people are here to bring God into the world. And if you want to erase Israel, you want to hurt innocent men, women, and children, don't give me the baloney stories taking away. And Israel, the Arabs live in Israel better than they live in any Arab country. And everybody knows that. When they make trouble and they start rioting, they're going to have problems. Then they're going to close the city, the borders. They're going to close the crossings. They're going to have a hard life. They choose to live like decent human beings and be nice and kind. They would be welcome and treated incredible by Israelis and by Jews, because Jews are a peaceful people that want peace. And they're here for peace. And this is just absolute abhorrent lies by pure despicable evil. That's just what it is. So Bilam, where am I coming to all of this? I just had to say this because this is the truth. Bilam, and obviously it's the clip of the unholy is breathing its last. So as I mentioned in the other class, it's putting up a fight. Fine. To put up a fight. People want to take sides right now. They can take sides. You can stand on the side of righteousness and truth and holiness and godliness, or you can choose to be sided with evil. That could be people's choice right before the moment of truth will arrive. It will arrive any second. As we know, we're holding at the birthing of truth. And lucky and fortunate are those who have a portion in truth, in holiness, and goodness, that choose right now to support the right side, not the wrong side. This is like other times of history. You had a chance at a later point that you're going to repent. You're going to do tshuva. Now there's not going to be any more chances. This is the final chance. Here's the final separation of good and evil. So Fortunate are those that are lucky. I'm talking to the Gentile population. Fortunate are those that are choosing what's right and what's good, and are not, God forbid, falling into this. And of course, evil masquerades as goodness. It masquerades and tries to present itself as the righteous, as the ones that are standing up for morality and goodness, and so on and so forth. Fine. If you believe so and you good, go ahead. In any case, Bilam is this prophet, and he was hired then to curse Israel, to curse the Jewish people. And what does he want to curse? He wants to curse to bring down divine wrath and bring a Holocaust upon the Jewish people from our very infancy in the desert. And it didn't work. It didn't work then. It's not going to work now either. The Jewish people are going to triumph in this world, because God is going to triumph in this world, and goodness and holiness is going to triumph, and righteousness and morality and what is good is going to triumph over evil. Because as much as God lets this world run its course, he still controls everything. And the world has a destiny, and it has a purpose, and it eventually will reach its destiny, for it to become a Garden of Eden, for it to become a garden of goodness. And being that we all know from all the signs that we are at its very end, that means it has to happen now. Or in any case, so this Bilam was called to curse Israel, but yet when he opened his eyes and in a prophetic vision and he looked at them, even he that was so bent, and he was the man of the evil eye, could not see in bad. He can see their roots. He immediately, when a prophet sees, and he's not looking through human glasses, he's looking through divine glasses. These are not the same glasses that Bilam, the same vision that Bilam had usually. Bilam's usually was extreme wickedness. He looked for sin, he looked for bad, he looked for accusation, he had a very, very despicable eye. Whatever he looked at was just in the worst way possible, in the darkest way possible. But for the moment that God chose him as a vessel, for whatever reason, to communicate his will and his word and his communication, then Bilam is lifted up beyond his evil, and he's now looking and gazing with God's eyes. And when he's looking with God's eyes, he sees it the way God sees Israel, and that is in its magnificent beauty. So he's discussing the great origins of the Jewish people, and he says, Merosh Tzurim Arenu, from the peaks of mountains I see him, and from the hills, Arenu, I behold him. And we discussed the meaning of it, but the Zohar goes in to explain that Bilam is really speaking about, and again, I'm really not going to discuss this, I'm just going to say a point, because that he's referring to the root of Israel in the supernal source. The supernal source of Israel is in divine attributes, because the Jewish people are rooted, Jewish souls are beyond and above and beyond creation. There is the realm of creation, which doesn't exist and doesn't begin in the physical. There's many levels, multi-layers and layers and layers and layers of spiritual levels of existence, of angelic beings and souls and so on and so forth. But yet it's all part of creation. Above and beyond creation is the world of emanation, which is not really a creation yet. And in the world of emanation, there is the attributes of the divine, which is it's God presenting himself with a certain personality. That divine personality, which is called the supernal man, that is the source of the Jewish soul. And that's what Bilam says, I see him in his source. Yet, what's called Israel is referred to as the 6 divine emotions of attributes. Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, the 6 divine attributes, that's the root of Israel. Now Bilam says, but I see them rooted even deeper. I see them rooted even higher. Where do I see them rooted? Merosh Tzurim Arenu, I see, which means he was able to see that the emotions that we're speaking about, which are the source of the divine emotions, which are the source of all of the souls, is really rooted in a place beyond the emotions. And that is in the divine intellect, which is infinitely above the divine emotions, which we know it's called the Chabad, Chachma Bina Das. And he's primarily seeing Israel rooted both in Bina and in Chachma. Now, Chachma and Bina is still, on that level, you can't really see the emotions yet, but they're there in a very subtle way. And that's what he's describing, the Zohar describes, that primarily the source of Israel is in Bina, and Bina is called mother, like a mother who carries a baby inside of her. So on the one hand, you can't see the baby. You don't know what the baby looks like unless you take a sonogram, and even then, right? You don't really know what the baby looks like when it's in the mother, because the baby is concealed and hidden within the mother. But really, the baby didn't start in the mother. The baby started in the father, in the seminal drop that was delivered from the father to the mother during their intimacy. That seminal drop is already the potential. It contains within it already the child. And these are two levels of concealment. One level of concealment is, so there's what we can say really is there's three levels. There's revelation, and there is concealment, and then there is concealment of concealment. Revelation is where the baby is born already. It's on the outside. Spiritually, we're referring the divine attributes as they are already fully manifest and revealed, the divine emotions. That's called Israel in a born state. Then there is Israel as a fetus. That means it's still embedded in a level way above that, called Gevaos. It's called the hills. Or as we learned in the first class, maybe it means the valleys, which is the concept of the feminine dimension, which is an indent, versus the masculine, which is a protrusion, as we're also going to see in today's class. So when we are contained within our mother, within the Bina element, like a fetus within the mother, we're in a concealed, but more pronounced. It's concealed, but the baby is still a individual, identifiable being. You have to look with an X-ray. You have to look with some kind of a device that can see beyond the barrier of the mother's of the mother is carrying the baby in the womb. You have to see past that. But still, you could identify the baby. It has already an image, and has already a fully developed, especially in the end of the pregnancy. Earlier stages, it's in the middle of its development. But if you trace it even further back into the father, over there, it's a non-existent existence. You can't say it doesn't exist because it wouldn't show up in the mother if it wasn't there first in the father. But in this state, its existence is so not pronounced and so unidentified. It's just, especially before the droplet was separated from the father's brain. Imagine it's not like a drop already. It's like a pre-drop, when it's still the potential. It's like a father carrying his children before he even gets married, before he even knows the woman that he's going to marry and have children with. Yet in his brain, in his inner being, he has all of his potential children there inside of him, but in a non-existent state. So Bilam was able to see the root of the Jewish people even in the level of the divine aspect of Chachma, which is the real true source of the Jewish soul. Now Chachma is the place where the Ein Sof, it's the first recipient, it's the first of the divine attributes, the first recipient of the Ein Sof, and therefore Chachma itself, as we learned last week, it's called reisha, it's called head, unidentifiable, unknowable head. It's still a place where the infinite meets the beginning of definition of finitude. It's not yet finite, even Chachma, but it's where the energy of existence separates from pre-existence. When I say separate, it means it starts to emerge, but it's still very much connected to the pre-existent energy of the infinite. Chachma is the potential of existence. And Bina is already beginning to seeing the details and the form. But the divine emotions are only born in Bina. And last week we were learning that is to be seen in the Hey. In the Hey of God's name, because Chachma and Bina, Chachma is a Yud, is a point. Hey is an expansion. There's an expansion to the width and an expansion to the length. So Hey is taking the point of Chachma and expanding it, just like the mother takes the baby of a point and expands the child, the details. But really, the Bina is not yet the baby. The Bina is the mother of the baby. So in the Hey, the two lines that make up a Hey, which is the Dalid, the right side and the roof of the Hey, that's still the Bina. The baby, the fetus, is the other small little leg, the left leg of the Hey. That's the fetus within the space of the mother, and that's the Vav. Vav, in God's name, we know Yud Kei Vav. Vav is already the next stage. Vav equals the number 6, represents the 6 divine attributes, which are all of God's personality, emotional attributes, which are already far closer to existence, to creation, because we know God creates the world with 6 emotions, which are responsible for the 6 days and the 6 directions, and so on and so forth. Here's already a much closer state of the divine to the God is far more adapted, so to speak, already, or acclimating his energy already far more to the creation. It's not yet ready for actual investment in the creation, even on the level of the emotions. There it's also still too intense and too infinite, if you can say. Only when it descends further from the Vav and it goes into the Hey, the final Hey, which the final Hey is Malchut, which Malchus means kingship, and kingship already requires a creation, because you can't be a king without a creation. That's when the connection is made, and that's why Malchus is also called speech, because speech is where you're actually communicating with someone. The emotions, however, are also connected to someone, because without anyone around you, without any community, without any people, without anything there's not really much room for emotions. Emotions are your feelings in relationship to somebody and something outside of you. So therefore, the emotions are already a preparatory state for the divine to engage in a creation. But the actual engagement in the creation and interaction in the creation only happens when the energy is reduced from the emotions into speech. Just like in any relationship, we have powerful emotions, but if people would have to deal with our emotions, they would get burnt by our craziness. Our emotions are crazy, sometimes so intense. Others can't handle your emotion. You have to filter the emotion. The emotions get filtered into speech. The words weaken the emotion tremendously. They lower the voltage. They diminish it. Just because it goes into containers, it goes into vessels, and that kind of lessens it. Once it's lessened and it's contained in the words, now it's already communicatable. That's the system. So Israel, the Jewish people, are rooted in the 6 emotions, but as Bilam is saying, Arenu, Merosh Tzurim Arenu, from the peaks of mountains, I can trace them much higher, as they are rooted in the close, at the very beginning point, and therefore they're touching the Or Ein Sof. And that's why we, the Jewish people, Israel acts as a communicator between the infinite and the world. Some people look at these times that we're in right now as the end times. It's a terrible mistake. We're not living in the end times. We're living in the beginning times. Because the moment we're going to achieve complete attachment, the final connection, we have created the whole pipeline in which we have now a direct pipeline in which the infinite can flow freely into the world, and there's no obstruction anymore. That's what we've accomplished through observance of mitzvot, and the Jewish people serve as that communicative energy to the world, from the infinite to the finite. And once the infinite is going to emerge in the universe, the blessing in the world, life, is going to become so much more beautiful, so much more energized, so much more enlightened, so much more the blessing, the opportunity, the abundance, the everything. Life is going to be the way it ought to be. We're not going to have any questions anymore of how can a world created by God have so much darkness, because it's not going to be dark anymore. It's just going to be bright and brighter and brighter and brighter. So the Jewish people are able to do that because we serve as the bridge between the utterly infinite and the creation by playing this, by being rooted in that which is called the supernal Israel, which is really God, the divine attributes, where God is called man, Adam, but that connects us to the beyond man element of the divine. This is a little bit of what we were learning about in the last couple of classes. We were learning how this man that is born, so to speak, as the godly combination, configuration of divine attributes, which is the supernal man that Ezekiel, by the way, Yecheskel, we're going to read Haftorah on Shavuos, saw on top of the throne. That's this man that we're talking about, which is called Israel. That's why I'm just saying, going back to what I said at the beginning, those who hate Israel are hating the man that sits on the throne. Do you understand? Those who want Israel killed down here want Israel killed up there. It's frightening. But okay, sadly. But that's why it makes sense, or else, no other people, no other country, no other entity would be a target for such irrational hatred. It's only because this is the ultimate. That's why there is such animosity and such hatred. But that's also the reason why, we're going to win. You can't fight City Hall. You definitely can't fight God. It's amazing to me how people keep on trying, keep on trying, again and again, as if eventually they're going to win. Not going to happen. Okay, that's what we learned till now. There's so much information here. The question is, where do you pick up from? So let me add some ideas that will lead us up to the part of the Zohar that we're talking about now. Then the Zohar continued on what we learned last week. Because the continuation of Bilam's prophecy, and where he said, I see him, he said, from the peaks of mountains I see him, and from the hilltops, Arenu, right? Hen am levadod yishkon. They're a nation that sits alone. There you go. A nation that sits in isolation. How true Bilam's words are today. As true as it was back then. Israel sits alone. Israel sits alone. So what does it mean they sit alone? Israel sits alone. What does it mean Israel sits alone? So it's related to what we just said. As we spoke last week, since the level of the divine emotions are already, to a certain degree, a source for creation. So if Israel would be rooted just in the emotions of the divine, then there would be some kind of a inherent connection between Israel and the rest of the creation, between the Jewish people and the rest of the creation. Because at the root of our existence, it's already on a level in the divine of emotions, and emotions connect the one who has the emotion to the one in which the emotion is about. So then there would be already somewhat of a connection. But since Israel is rooted in a level that transcends the emotion, and they're rooted in the divine intelligence, God's intellect is completely above and beyond the world. No relationship at all. Last week we learned, that's what we see when we look at a human being. He said last week there is two levels of human. There's the inner human and the outer human. The outer human are the limbs of the body, and the inner human is the brain. The brain is isolated and separate, as we see even in the body. The brain sits in its own compartment, almost like detached from the body. Since Israel is rooted in God's head, in the brain, in the Chabad, And even there, they're rooted in the top of the brain, so to speak, in the level of Chachma. That's where they're all the way in, which Chachma is really still undefined and unspecified, and Chachma is still submerged in the Or Ein Sof, in the infinite. So that's what causes levadod, alone, separation. Now this is an important idea before we learn further. This, that Israel is rooted in the level of the mochen, we learned last week, which is in the head, is hinted to where you look at remember, Israel is the Vav, the letter Vav, because the letter Vav is number 6, which 6 represents the 6 emotions. So you have the letter Vav in the Yud, K, Vav, in God's name, the Vav, which is already a distinguishable letter. But then there is the Vav, when the Vav is still included, as we said earlier, in the Hey that precedes it. And this higher state, especially when it's still part of the parents, not yet an emergence as a child, it's also hinted to in the Vav of the letter Aleph. If you look at the letter Aleph, which is the first letter of the alphabet, it's comprised of three parts. There is a diagonal Vav, and on top of it sits a Yud, and the bottom of it, on the left side, sits another Yud. The two Yuds, one is an upside down Yud at the bottom, and one is and the idea is, this is Chachma and Bina. The upper Yud on the right side is Chachma. The lower Yud on the left side is Bina, and the Vav is the center, which is the Vav, which can sometimes be considered Das, because Das is the source of the 6 emotions, but it's the actual later emerges as the Vav, and it's being fed by Chachma and Bina together. And that's the Aleph. So this really gives us an understanding in the idea of Badad, alone, because Aleph stands in separation. It's Echad. It's above, and he says this is hinted to when we say in the verse of Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem. The first Hashem is Chachma, that's the Yud on the top of the Aleph. Elokeinu is Bina, because Bina is associated with Elokim, with Tzimtzum, with contraction. That's the lower Yud. And then Havaya, Yud Kei Vav, the second time it says Yud Kei Vav, that's the Vav, because we know Tiferes is called Havaya. Chachma is called Havaya, and Tiferes is called Havaya. So Hashem, Elokeinu, Havaya. Chachma, Bina, and then Tiferes, which is the spine, so to speak, of the entire Ze'er Anpin. And it's all hinted to in the Aleph. This Hashem, Elokeinu, Hashem, make up the letter Aleph. Which letter Aleph? Of the next word, Echad. Havaya, Shema Yisrael, hear Israel. What should you hear? You should hear your own soul source. Havaya, Elokeinu, Havaya. That's the comprising the Aleph, which make up the Aleph from the word Echad. But here's the idea. Just to be rooted in the sublimity of the infinite, and just to be separated and removed from all of existence and above and beyond everything, then we serve no purpose. For above and beyond the creation and above and beyond the world and lofty and high and sourced in the highest of places, that's very nice, but what good does it do? What are we doing down here? The answer is that very transcendence and that very connection and that very unbelievable removed access, so to speak, to what is utterly undefined and unspecified and purely infinite. The purpose of Israel and the Jewish people is to channel that, to funnel that, where to, not into ourselves, into our souls, but into the world, into the creation, into the kingdom, into the actual fixed defined, specified, limited, finite creation. And not into the world of angels, the spiritual beings. They too need this light and benefit from this light and are enlightened by this light and are thrilled by this light. True, but that's not the purpose. Purpose is Earth, planet Earth, physical, material, most fixed, most limited dimension. Channel it all the way down. That's the hint of the word echad, where the aleph represents this dynamic of the Ze'er Anpin, the 6 emotions, as it is flanked, literally, by the Chachma and Bina, which give it such a transcendence, which give it such a badad state, such a removed state, such a lofty state, such an untouchable state, such a transcendental, undefinable state. Even while it's emotions, it's still connected to the beyond emotions and beyond definitions. And yet, from there, it's empowered to get married with the Dalet. Aleph, Ches. Doesn't explain over here what the Ches over here, how that comes in. Dalet, which is the Dalet, is Malchus, which is actually the world of speech, the source of creation. And then the Aleph channels its energy into the Dalet, and that's into the world. That idea is the idea that not only do we have Jacob, not only do we have the soul of Israel, but Jacob gets married. Israel gets married. Who does he marry? He marries the Dalet. Who is the Dalet? Malchus. 2 levels of Malchus, we learned last week. The upper level of Malchus is Yaakov marries 2 wives, Leah and Rachel. Leah is the higher level of Malchus, the Pnimius of Malchus. Malchus as a more in transcendental state. That's in the world of words, of letters. Malchus is words, letters. It's the letters of thought, inward letters. And then finally marry Rachel, called the lower Malchus, which is the source of the spoken word, spoken letters, words that actually make up the actual physical universe, the actual creation. And this channel of Israel is the channel from the infinite into Malchus through our prayer, through all our good deeds that we do, davening, mitzvot, and so on and so forth. It's an amazing, amazing role to play. The flow of energy all the way down from the aleph into the dalets. So our very transcendence empowers our very immanence and involvement. And that's the secret of the Jew, which has been kind of so hard to for the world to deal with, because it's not like Jews are spiritual people hiding in monasteries. If we would be hiding in monasteries, living in some kind of a secluded places and being holy, letting, and removed from everything, fasting and singing, kumbaya, everybody would be very happy with the Jewish people. No one would mind. The crazy thing about the Jewish people is that the Jewish people are the entrepreneurs. They're the business people. They're involved in every aspect of life. They're the lawyers. They're the reporters. They're the doctor. They're in the media. They're in Hollywood. They're in this. There's nothing in the world where they don't have their hands involved. And yet, at the same time, there is something there that of otherworldliness, something of transcendence. So that's what's so confusing. That's what so doesn't make any sense. If you're God's people, then be God's people. What are you doing running around over here and being so so involved in earth? But that's the whole point. You can't change earth unless you're involved in earth. But the Jew has to be Jewish, which means the Jew has to be connected as well. Sadly, when the Jew becomes assimilated, in other words, and loses his spiritual connection, the connection is always there, but subconscious. But thinking about it in a conscious way, then he's not funneling. Then he's just actually causing a lot of discomfort. So a Jew has to be openly revealed of what and who he or she is, a channel to communicate and to connect the divine and the infinite into the creation. But in this discourse and in this passage of the Zohar, we get a little bit of an understanding of the structure of how it emerges from its non-definition state all the way down to a more definitive, and we serve as that mediating, as that communicator of the infinite into the finite. And the Zohar refers to, this is an important idea, I just want to, because we're going to make reference to it today, that this idea that the midot, the attributes, the emotional attributes, which is inherently the root, I'm saying, which is the identity, the source of the Jewish soul, which is called Israel, when it's to be found on a loftier state, as we said, hinted to in the letter aleph, which is a combination of chachma and bina, the two yuds connecting to the diagonal vav. That combination, the Zohar refers to it as a unification of reisha. Remember, I'm just going to repeat this, something we learned last week. Reisha, the head, giza, the root, ushvil, and the path. So we learned last week what that means. You can listen to class number 4. Reisha is, he says, reisha is the chachma, it's called the head. And he refers to it to a ruach, a wind, or a spirit that's, the words that the Zohar uses, it's a spirit that's going upward. Avira de salka, it's ear that's going up, because as we said before, the whole, the uniqueness of chachma is in its non-definitive, non-definition, non-structured state. And that's Havaya, the higher Yud Kei Vav Kei, and that's called Reisha, head. Giza, the root. A root represents a root for a growth. Something that's already a root is, if you're calling something a root, means something will grow from it. So that's referring to the opposite. Bina is considered already the beginning of definitions, the beginning of design, where chachma is, so to speak, the tail end of what is undefined and has no image, no form, no definition. Bina, that's why chachma is called ayin, nothingness. Bina is called yesh. Now, even though bina is very far from what we call something, but it's already the seed of something. That's why it's called giza, it's called the root. And particularly, it's called giza because it's geza yishai. It's the root of the evolving godliness of Moshiach. Here's where Moshiach comes in, which is the baby born from the Shekhinah, from Malchus, which is a more concrete, definitive presence of the divine within creation in the form of invested and imbued in the form of, in the human form, and ultimately even in the physical form of Moshiach Tzedkenu. So being that it's the root of this definition, it's called Giza, which is the root. Shvil is the path, which is the power of connecting these two opposites. Nothingness and something. How do you connect no and yeah? How do you connect something that is energy is to withdraw into non-definition, into non-beingness, to something whose energy is to define and specify and go into beingness. And obviously these two things are moving in two opposites. Their very nature is in two opposites. So you need this incredible power that can pull the nothingness and down and lift the somethingness up to cause the nothing and the something to click and hold on to each other. And that's the power of das. And that's why it's called shvil, a path that connects. Das means to connect to opposite. Man and woman connecting is through the power of das. They're also two opposite energies, fire and water. To connect the two, it's through the power of das. That's why your physical union is called va'adam yada. Knowledge is that connector that bonds the two, brings them together. Not knowledge as information, but the power of this concentration, the power of bringing it together. That's the path. That's that part of the aleph, the vav of the aleph. Okay, once we've learned that, let's allow for the last passage of the Zohar. Now I'm going to read some Zohar over here. Now again, for those who followed the last few classes, that might have been a lot of repetition. Sorry. For those who didn't follow the last few classes, that might have been way too little of explanation. And now we're going to continue, see what we're going to read. Okay. Now the Zohar says, after the Zohar is continuing to explain the psukim, the verses that Bilam is saying. So he says, again, the last words were, "An am levadad yishkon." The Jewish people live alone, and ubagoyim, and amongst the nations, lo yischashav. They're not included. They're not counted amongst the nations. We had an interesting explanation about that last week. I don't want to repeat it. All about the language of Hebrew and its quality, in which through the letters we can see much deeper because of the investment of the Israel, of the emotions into the letters. The letters are saturated not just with the letters, but with much deeper godliness than the letters themselves. And that's why by analyzing the letters, we can get very deep knowledge and intimate knowledge of that which is the secret of the cosmos, beyond and beyond and beyond and beyond. That's what we learned in the last words, Bagoyim lo yischashav. Now we're holding on the next verse that Bilam says. He says, Mi mana afar Yaakov. Who can count the earth of Jacob? Even, Bilam is speaking prophecy. He's speaking in poetic words. So even just to decode his simple meaning of his words needs a commentary. But what does he say? Who can count afar Yaakov, the earth of Jacob? Rashi says what it means is who can count the mitzvot, the commandments that the Jewish people do with earth. That even earth, which is such a lowly thing, there are so many mitzvot that we do with earth. And then, like covering blood with earth, and then there is the earth that is used by the testing of the woman that we're suspicious that she was engaging in immoral behavior, and so on and so forth. It's hard to understand what does he mean, who can count? If you go through the Torah, it's basically just 2 mitzvot that we actually do with the earth. I think 2. So what does it mean, who can count? You could count, it's only 2. It's a good question. Not for now. But the deeper meaning, we're soon going to see, what does this mean, who can count? In the deeper meaning, the Zohar is not going to say who can count. That means who can count? We don't know who can count. Oh, by the way, let me first finish the verse. Who can count the earth of Jacob? Umispar, and can count, give a number, esrova Yisrael. Simple, it means a quarter of Israel. Who can count a quarter of Israel? What in the world is he talking about? So Rashi gives his interpretation on that second half. Also, Rova, Rashi learns, is not Rova, it means reviut, which is the idea of the intimacy of the Jewish people, which is referring to the procreation. That means that so many children will be born, and those children are coming as a result of their intimacy, and that's what he's referring to. Okay, that's according to Rashi's simple meaning. Well, the Zohar is giving obviously over here a pirush, an explanation al pisod, based on the mystical. And how does this connect? We'll have to understand how is this all connecting to this idea that we're talking about before, that Bilam is now seeing Israel in its root and in its ability to channel down into the world. So let's see what the Zohar says. Let me read to you just simply, and everything that the Zohar says as is, don't expect to understand a word, but after we learn the commentary from the Alter Rebbe, it will begin to fall into place. So the Zohar says, Mi mana afar Yaakov. So first the Zohar is going to explain the meaning of the word me. So the Zohar says, what's me? Me, ahun nekudei. Me is this high point. Whenever you say a point, mean it's not yet, it's pre-designed. It's just a point. Like the letter Yud, it's a point. Which is what? A point where reisha, where the head, the giza, and the root, ushvila, and the pathway, which we discussed before, that are these 3 things: the head, the root, and the path. Bitmidu ihu, are still in a state of concealment. That's the meaning of the word me, which I will already give a little commentary. In other words, where the aleph that we spoke about before, which is the combination of the chachma and the bina, which create that vav, which flow into the vav, which are the 6 emotions, when this aleph is in a very, very, very preliminary state, it's still in an unborn potential. And that's when it's all still in the point. Imagine someone taking a quill and putting it into the ink, and let's say there's enough ink to write the full letter aleph, but at this point they just have the point of ink and they begin to put it down on the parchment, on the paper, and all you have is just a dot. But that dot is of ink. If you don't let it dry up, right, it's still a dot of wet ink, is going to, from that little point, you're going to spread out, the brush of the quill is going to take it and make it into an aleph. So at this point, you have all the whole dynamic of the head, the root, and the line in between still in a point, and that's called me, who, because it's still in its abstraction. Now, when I'm talking about an aleph on a parchment, I'm talking about a little aleph on a parchment. But what this is symbolizing is the cosmos. We're talking about the pre-cosmos. The pre-cosmos in its pre state, that first point, where, as we're soon going to see, where the yud is the source to become the hey, but it's not yet a hey, it's just the yud, just the point, right? So simply it would be the point of chachma, because chachma is still a point, it's not yet a design. But we're going to see soon, in his interpretation, it's not chachma, it's chachma already flowing into bina. That's when it's called me, because me is also, mem yud is 50. Mem is 40, yud is 10, 50. 50 is a number associated with bina, not with chachma. But it's bina in its most pristine beginnings. It's bina as bina is just beginning to receive from chachma before it develops into a complete structure. It's like the power of analysis that's in the left side of the brain as it is receiving the point before it begins to develop its analysis and its expansion. It's just at that very, very beginning of receiving. So that's when it's called me. So let's read it again. Let's say I can't contain myself. I'm already giving explanation. But I think it's going to be easier this way than just reading it cryptically and then, confusing everybody. So it's a point. Reisha, where you have the head. Vegiza and the root. Ushvila and the path. Bitmira ihu, it's still hidden. That's why it's called me. And therefore, but it's a level that is so hidden that you can't even acquire about it. V'loi kaima l'sha'ala labar. Anybody on the outside can't even ask about it. There's nothing even to ask. It's like, a teacher gives a class. After the class, you're confused. And you have questions. So you have a million questions you want to ask the teacher. That's when the class was given. But before the teacher even opened their mouth and before they even said anything, it's just they're walking in with the, and you're starting to bombard. There are some students like that. They bombard the teacher with questions on the class before the teacher even gave the class. So this is but you can't ask. I didn't teach anything. What are you asking? There's nothing here yet. Yeah, but we see already. We can see on your face. So we're already questioning. The Zohar says, at this point, like kaimel shayli, you can't ask anything yet. Avol, however, mishata from the time, the sha'ari le'izbina, when it's beginning to be built, when permission is granted for it to be ispana, to it to be structured. That means when bina is already emerging into bina, which means bina means understanding, which means you're taking the seed of an idea, the kernel of an idea, and you're beginning to dissect it and to see all of its details. So therefore it's opening up into an expansion, which that's what bina is all about. Then, and to become a chamber in this expanded space. It's a chamber. For what? For the kernel to come in, the kernel of chachma, the point, the inner point of the idea to come into that space, to fill that space. Ulamebedei to become a chamber. How does that happen? What forces the point into an expansion? Biurei, that's with his will. With his will. That means that there's a power transcending the chachma and the bina that's causing the chachma, which is the point, to expand into the analysis into the analytical side of the mind to expand. Without a will, it doesn't happen. So there's a power of the soul that transcends the epiphany and causes. It's an idea which is not going to be elaborated over here, but bina's expansion is rooted in keter, in crown, which is higher than chachma. Even though bina is lower than chachma, but the ability that bina has to take an undefinable point and to extrapolate details and ramification and expansion is because really bina is rooted in the pre-consciousness of keser, and over there it gets that ability to unlock the secrets that are hidden in chachma. That's an interesting idea. So once the bina begins to expand, the shara, she's given permission, is bana to be built, ulamebed to become a chamber, biru'use with the desire, the ikra, and now it's called me. Me means who, but a different level of who. Not the me that we spoke about before, when it's still locked, when it's still a closed point, when it's not yet, that first bit of ink that we said before it expands. There, it's a me, it's unknown. Me means unknown, but not an unknown that you can't even ask. It's so unknown that you're not even provoked to ask about it, because it's not even provoking a question, because it's still so hidden that it's too hidden to bring even a question. Now, it's still very lofty, because it hasn't yet descended, the baby hasn't been born yet, it hasn't yet been brought down, but it's already in a state where you can ask questions about it. You can inquire about it. It provokes an inquiry. It provokes a question. And that's the idea of the ikra me. Now it's called me. Which is what? Which now you can ask a question from it. It's called me, the kaimala sha'ila. It's me that you can ask about. Shara, now it's it starts to be built. Diyukna delay mamish. Now, when she's already a full structure, now she can receive from chachma, and the impregnation can happen. The chachma bina becomes pregnant from the energy of chachma, which means that this intellectual expansion begins silently in a very subtle way to create an excitement, an emotion. But the emotion is still brewing within the intellect. So that's called a baby within its source. It's not yet an identifiable emotion. And again, we're talking about God's emotions. Can't forget that. We're talking about, but again, the human psyche is used just an example and as a metaphor for the divine, because God created us in His image, and therefore we can see how things evolve within us and apply them to its source. So, so now when this baby is being born, since the fetus that's now being born in the mother, which is the excitement, is really something that was germinated from who? From the father. Again, the father gave to the mother. It's like a physical intimacy. Man gives to the woman, and the woman creates from. A baby, a lot of time, or many times, has the father's features. What does the mother do then? The mother brings forth, again, if you're looking at the seminal drop, you're not seeing nothing. It's just a drop. It's a potential. But when that seminal drop fertilizes the egg, and there is a child being born, and then you look at this child, you see, hey, there's daddy. So the child is in the image of the father. So it is in the excitement, in the Israel above that's being built, is literally in the image of Chachma. As much as you can say Chachma has an image, the whole idea of Chachma we spoke earlier is ayin, is nothingness, but it's in accordance to the image of Chachma. And it means the yukna delay mamish, it's literally in his image. Apik, he brings forth the yukna delay. Here in Zohar it says nukba delay, it's a mistake. The Alter Rebbe's Girs in the Zohar is apik, he gives forth diyukna delay, his image, b'diyukna de'imei, in the image of his mother. That means, because the baby that's born is not just going to be the image of the father. It's not just a mother is producing, taking the father's potential and producing the baby. She's not just the oven that bakes it, and then here's your cake or whatever you made. That's not what it is. The mother also imprints herself in it. That's why the baby that's born is a combination of mom and dad. It's got both features. So it says, apik, when he brings forth diyukna delay, his image, b'diyukna de'imei, with the image of the mother as well. So Chachma and Bina together create now this child. Again, but there's two levels. Who's really responsible? Where does it really start? It really starts by the Shatchen. It really starts the moment mom and dad met for the first time and they have their first date. Is anybody talking about children yet? Is there even a potential? Yeah, but had they not met, there will never be children. So me, at this level, it's still unknown, utterly unknown. The child is still utterly unknown, unknown of unknown. You can't even ask on this place. But it's from this connection of me, even in its most abstract of abstract, that's already what is beginning the process of creating the child. Even though it will need to first descend from that very unknown me to a much lower level of me, where Bina becomes already a full-fledged structure, an expansive vessel to receive from Chachma and to take the Chachma energy and open it up in her space, and thereby bringing forth all the details and all the potential that there is in this child. And in psychological means, it means that the intellect brings forth the richness and all the nuances of the emotion. And then in the end, together from the power of father and the power of mother, this baby is born in his image and in her image. And that's what he's going to learn, is the meaning of me, mana. Doesn't mean who can count. We'll see. Let's read a little further, and we'll see how it fits in the verse. Let's read a little further. Now the Zohar continues. My me, what is me? Reisha v'giza ushvila. That's the head. Remember we said earlier, as a undefinable point, which has within it the entire aleph, the entire structure of the aleph. So he says, Daresha, that's the head, the giza and the root. The head is the top of the yud, the top of the aleph, the upper yud. Giza is the bottom of the aleph, the lower yud. Shvila is the path that runs in the middle. The ispashit leizbina, that ispashit, and now it expands, le'ispana, to be built up. Bipshita dechadei chala. First, it's structured. The bina gets structured from the yud, from this undefinable point, where chachma and bina are connected, but very, 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 very abstract. Then the bina emerges, and her first structure is in one hechal, in one side. As he explains, we'll soon see. It means that first, when Bina emerges from the Yud, and you expand the Yud, you have a horizontal line, and you have a right side line. But you don't have yet a left side. It's a Dalit. The Yud expands like this way and that way. Later she becomes pregnant, she gets the bottom leg, which is the left leg. But first, her own expansion is just two dimension, horizontal and downward. So that's called Chad Heichal, one Heichal, but as he explains right away, it's not really a full structure. Because in order for a building to be a building, it needs at least 3 walls. That means there's going to have to be a right side, there's going to have to be a left side. And you don't have a left side in the Dalit. So we're going to see. So that's why Bipshita, first its initial emergence is Chad Heichal, one chamber. But Letrein Sitrin Bane, but when its real building, its real structure is to 2 sides. Va'afal gav, okay. And the two sides is because it's going to build something that's going to have three dimensions. Well, we'll wait for the interpretation inside to understand this better. Va'afal gav da'apik li Yisrael the iyuvav. And even though it's birth now, that is going to now give birth to, as a result of this union of father and mother, of Chachma and Bina, to create the child, it's going to bring forth this vav. We said before, vav is the 6 emotions, which is the product, which is the child. So even though it's giving birth to a boy, but the boy is going to have simultaneously with him, born together with him, a twin sister. Oif hachi apik, so too it will bring forth, he gives forth, who? The father, in his production and his germination, in which he germinates his child, along with his boy, he's going to provide his boy with a girl. And in the sense, even though they're brother and sister, but in the supernal union above, they get married. And this is Malchut, which is the Shekhinah, which is the wife, the designated wife, who's later going to marry the Ze'er Ampin, the 6 emotions, which is going to become the missing link that is necessary for creation to happen. Because the 6 emotions are then going to flow into speech. So, and remember, we spoke about this primarily in the second class. We were talking about that when that included in this vav. Remember, in the bottom vav of the hay, in the left side of the hay, there's a vav. On the bottom, there is a little yud sticking out, like the letter tuf. It goes out, the yud. And that's the malchus, which is also born already, which means the potential letters. Not only are emotions created from the intellect, but letters, words that can carry emotions are also created, which is the feminine element of letters, of speech. So that's the malchut is also created already. As he says, even though it's bringing forth the Yisrael, the Yisrael, Israel, the Iyuvav, which is the Vav, Oif Hachi, Apik Lenukvedile, he is also bringing forth his female. Who's female? His partner, the son, the 6 emotions partner that is going to partner, it's his wife, Kechadot together. He's preparing her for him. Just like we see that when Adam was created, Adam was created with an extra rib. And that extra rib is going to become Eve. So it wasn't that Adam was created first without Eve, without Chava, and then God later created Chava independently. He created Chava as an inherent part of Adam, of Adam. Adam and Chava were created together, male and female. And then later she was separated. So this is the idea. But she was not created as a full-fledged entity. She was created as like included in him and then separated. So based on that now we're saying that the words, the world of Malchut, which are the words, are not a product of the emotions. They're a product of the same 2 parents, Chachma and Bina, create the son and they create the daughter, and eventually the ability for the 2 of them to get married. And as a result of that, birth the creation and all the energy that flows into the creation. So who's responsible for that? This union. And the union is called me. Now we understand the meaning of the verse. Me, mana. Mana over here doesn't mean count. Mana over here means prepared. From the word man. Man, we ate manna in the midbar. We ate man. Man was prepared food. God prepared sandwiches for us every day. It's called man, prepared. Me, the level of me, see how the mystical is so different. Me, mana, who can count? Afar Yaakov, the earth of Jacob. That's a simple meaning. Who can count? The deeper meaning, me, the entity called me, mana, prepared already. In other words, didn't just create a boy, and then he doesn't have a shidduch. He already prepared mana, he already prepared Afar Yaakov, the earth of Yaakov. Yaakov is the man. The earth of Yaakov is the female that receives the man. That's called earth, because Malchus is called earth, because it's the lowest level of the divine, and therefore it's called the earth. We find it amongst the sages, they refer to the woman is called Mother Earth. She's associated with Earth, just like Earth produces everything, has the power to grow. The woman has the power to create and all that. It's all from Earth. That's where we find the deep connection. And see, next week in the Torah also, that when they have to check the woman out, if she's pure or not, they take from the earth of the Mishkan and they mix it in the water in that drink. The earth, because a woman inherently is related to the level of called earth. So who prepared the earth of Jacob? And we also know in the marriage, a woman grounds a man. Without a woman, a man is all over the place. He's nowhere. He needs to get married. She grounds him. She stabilizes him, puts his feet on the ground. And that's why she's called the earth of Jacob. So Mana, he's the one who prepared Afar, Yaakov, the Zohar says. Mana kamada at Omar. Now he learns the word Mana means Vayaman lahem amelech. The king prepared for them food. This is talking about, I think, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, or Daniel. The king prepared for them something. Vayaman. Umishloyach manos, or when we send gifts to each other, we say we send prepared baskets. You know, we know today's days people work so hard to make nice shalach manos. It's a prepared. It's not just here, take an orange. People work on preparing it. It's a prepared dish that you send to someone. Yavle nevaz bisar ravi akira. He gave him, that means father and mother, when they created their son, they gave him an awesome gift. And that is his wife. Va'apikla, and they prepared her kachada minei, together as one from him and within him. Bahu pshita the ispashit, in that expansion that they expanded, that's the vav. Remember, the vav is the expansion. Apik tarvayu kachada, they bring both of them out. The vav and the yud connected to the bottom of the vav, which is the malchus element. The emotion together with the words, together, male and female, both of them together. Kegav nida pashat lahacha lahacha apik bra ubrata beriga chada. In 1 second, the Zohar says he brings out the son and the daughter. Valda, and that's why also the boy is called heaven and the woman is called earth. And he brings the idea that heaven and earth were created instantly at the same time. It wasn't that first God made heaven and then he made earth, even though you might think so when you read the verse in the beginning when he created heaven and earth. But the Zohar says both were created equally. Heaven is the influencer, that's the male. Woman is the influenced and the recipient, that's the female. Both of them together. And this applies on all levels, all the way up to the emergence of male and female in the divine. Is Beruach Chada, they were both created together, B'shai Chada, at the same instant. Now that we read this, before we continue further, what it means, let's read it inside. And I explained a lot of it already, so it's going to go pretty quickly, but obviously we're going to learn. Okay. I just read the Zohar, now let's read his interpretation. Now, obviously, I already explained. So it's not as cryptic as it would have sounded like. Had I not explained anything, it would have been just one big cryptic mess. I already integrated in the teaching of the Zohar the meaning of it, according as the Reb Shneur Zalman of Liadi, who had the incredible ability to crack the Zohar open and to reveal its hidden gems and its hidden secrets. Now, all of this will be explained based on what we said before. The Piddush, Merosh, Tzurim, Arenu, in the top of mountains I see him. We've already explained above, Be'inyan Havav. That in the first hay of God's name, Yud K Vav K, there's a first hay and a latter hay. So in the Vav of the first hay, the Shem Havaya of Yud K Vav K, which is the level where the Ze'er Anpin is in a state of fetus, in a state of pregnancy, in Bina, in the mother. And what is that? When the light of the mother, Kibla Oid Hashefa Oid Abba, when the light of the father, which is called Chachma, transmits to Bina, and Bina receives from Chachma, the kernel of somethingness, the kernel, the beginning of a little drop, a little point of the infinite, which will serve as the power to construct everything. So when she receives this flow from the light of Abba, of Father, Shehu Yud, which is the Yud, then she's called me. So earlier we learned that what? That the Vav inside the Hey is once she's already received and she became pregnant with it. But before that, before she received this influence, to give birth to the midos, to the emotions, nikra gam b'chinas bina b'shem nekudila. So bina itself is still called, she's also called a point. Once she's already becomes a pregnant woman, which means she's already a vessel to receive and to develop a full-fledged container, so to speak, to receive and to have that ability to extract the details and so on and so forth. Then she's already, that's already a lower level. But when she's still prior to that, just making the connection, at that point, she too is called a point. She's called a higher nekuda, the chachma of chachma, because she's almost like swallowed, enamored in him. She's not so much pronounced as her. She's more lost in the masculine light of the energy of the point. And that nakuda is called me, who, and he's explaining how the bina, which is a recipient of chachma, and why she's called me. Because chachma is called yam. Chachma is called, we know there's a phrase called yam ha-chachma, the sea of wisdom. Chachma is yam. Now what's yam? Means spell a sea, an ocean. It's yud mem. The yud is before the mem. Yud mem is chachma. Yam ha-chachma. Now let's understand why. It's an ocean because even a tiny drop of the infinite is infinite. So it's an ocean. It's an ocean. She, the bina that's going to receive from chachma and begin to dissect and break it down and emerge the various different colorings and unearth the potentials of this otherwise infinite energy. So when she receives it, when things move from one side to the other side, it flips over. So from the yam, as it's coming to the recipient, it turns like one facing the other. The yam becomes me. Understand? In chachma, it's called yam. When it goes on the other side, it becomes me. That's why bina is called me. The hepech oisi is yam the chachma. The opposite of the letters of yam of chachma. Kidu as it is known. V'zeu sha'amar gam kan. That's why he says over here, bepirish mi mana, who can mi mana. The mi zeh, that this me, who b'chinas nekudei Allah, is a very high point. The pnimi is bina, the inner point of bina. Bina in its most exalted state, the innermost point of bina. Shesham, which on this level, reisha, the head, giza, and the root, vishvila, and the path, bitmira adayin, are still hidden. As we spoke earlier, it's like the point of the aleph when you're putting the point of, when you just have one point of ink before you develop this whole aleph. It's the mother before she's having yet her children, before she's beginning to, it's the initial, it's her first date. The potential children are going to be there, but it's still at this early stage. Pidish, he explains, Shvila b'chenes hadas. Shvil is the das, the level of das. Shekolol mechesed the gevura the abba ve'ima. That includes the chesed and gevura element, the father and mother, which we learned is already the structure of the aleph, shuhu reisha, which is the head, the giza and the root, which are the two yuds and the two sides of the aleph. Canal betzir tumunis aleph bevav, like the image of the aleph with a vav obeys yudin and two yuds. Adayin husham, but on this level it's still b'chinas helam hagadol, still in a very concealed state. Because at this point she's still lost in her husband. Now obviously, we can learn later this baby is in the image of the father. That means in the father itself there is the potential already, but in such a subtle state, it's called the 6 directions of the light of father. So the very notion that we can speak of 6 directions means it's a potential of a potential of a potential. but still lost in the infinite. And because it's still unpronounced and still lost, when she's attached to this level, she's too just as still an undefinable point. Canal b'pidish ki Merosh Tzurim Arenu at the peaks. That's what we said earlier. That I see Israel. I see the six emotions when it's still rooted in the Father, as we spoke earlier. Seeing the child in the seminal drop of the Father. There's not much structure there. There's not much form there. V'zeu sha'amar, and this is what he says. B'tmida deloy kaimas l'shayla labar. It's a type of hiddenness where you can't even question. There's a level of hiddenness where you're telling me something, you're revealing. I'm just confused about what you're revealing. I need clarification. But then there's a level of hiddenness which is still, you can't even ask about it because nothing was said yet. It's still that's the point. At this point, you don't know yet the existence of the emotions. Bimurgish, to sense them klal at all, therefore you can't even ask about them. But at the time that it begins to be structured, to be built, pidish. What does that mean? When mother begins to receive the light and the influence from the father, to give birth to the emotions, which that is called nikuda behechala, that's called a point. That's already going into a hechal, it's going into a full room. A hechal means a chamber. It's a full chamber, it's a full outer structure that's going to be the space for the idea, for the kernel, for the point to open up and to become an entire edifice. Like it is known in the letter Beis of the word reishis. Reishis is chachma. Reishis is the beginning. It's the quintessential drop. And what's Biurei in the beginning? It's when the light of chachma, reishis, is received in the Beis. The Beis is the structure that can receive the point. That's the process of creation. A kernel, a flash, an epiphany of God is now received and structured in a full developed understanding. So that's the Beis receiving the reishis. That's why it's interesting the sages say Beis reishis, that they separate the word reishis from the Beis, because Beis is the receptacle, is the vessel, and reishis is the energy. The energy is a point that goes into the Beis. Maybe the reishis is the aleph. The aleph is not yet part of creation, because chachma is called aleph. Aleph, I will teach you chachma. So maybe the aleph is not seen. The Beis is what you can see. Oz nikra, then it's called me, the kaimul shayla. That's a lower level of me. Earlier was me, the higher level of me was me, the flip side of chachma. Yam, me as she's still directly receiving from chachma, and she's still lost in the chachma. She's not yet, she doesn't have yet a stance on her own to be a container. She's still lost in her husband. Then she's called me, opposite of the word, but that's a me that you can't ask about. Then when she lowers down and becomes a me that could be asked about because she's a full structure, and now she's already has the space to create the emotions, to become pregnant and to create the emotions from it. Kamosha Kosov, like it says, this idea that on the lower level of Bina, you can ask about her. It's like earlier in the Maimon we learned that that's the difference between Bina and Tevuna. Tevuna is already when she's a source already for her children. So that's where you can ask already. Where do you see this idea that you can ask already? He brings a verse. The verse says, Ki sha'alna, please ask, liyamim arishayim, the early days. So he gives a mystical interpretation. Simply, it's a pasuk, sha'alna liyamim arishayim is where 128, it's in Eschana. In Deuteronomy, Eschana, it says, please ask the early days. What is the deeper meaning? Yamim days are the emotions. As we said, 6 days a week God created. 6 days are the 6 emotions. What does it mean, the early days? The early days means the divine emotions when they're still in a early stage. What's the early stage of the divine emotions? When they're not yet born, when they're preborn. They're in a fetus, the state of fetus. So when the emotions are still in a pre-state, they're called Yamim Rishonim, the early days. What does the pasuk say? Sha'alna, ask the Yamim Rishonim. That means that when the days are in a fetus state within the mother, you can ask about them. Simply, it's because, like, when a woman is pregnant and you can notice her pregnancy, you can ask. So what are you having? You know if it's going to be a boy. You know when are you having the baby? But when a woman conceives, no one knows. She herself doesn't know. And it's no one's business when she had her intimacy with her husband. That's not over there. You don't mess in. You don't stick your nose in. That's private. When she's pregnant. She's going to have a baby. Okay, so these questions can start. Beyond that place, there's no questions. No one knows. It's a concealed state. So Sha'alna liyamin rishonim in the spiritual dynamics is at this point you can already ask. Before that you can't ask. Shenzayin tachtoin is the bina, which are the 7 lower elements of bina. Over that you can ask. Like explained in Zohar many places. V'oz shayich b'chinas iborza, and then there is pregnancy. B'mei ima, in the womb of the mother. Gamkein, and that's why you see the vav is inside. The vav is inside the hay. That's the left leg of the vav. Shu avav shebetoicha hay rishayna. That's the vav that's in the first hay. Kenis kaliyau, bepirush, and that's the meaning of. And we learned earlier in the beginning of the discourse, umigva'is, and from the hills Ashurenu. It's Ashurenu means I see him, but Ashurenu also means it's stepping out, because the baby is already emerging outward. V'zeu shaman, and that's why he says mishaita deshari lizbina, from the time that it starts to be structured. Liyoisa bina b'b'chinas keli, when the bina starts to become a vessel, which means bina is going more into her own position, not lost in her husband. She is becoming more of an identity of her own, which is her power. What's her power is to dissect, to bring out the details, to uncover the specifics. She's a base kibul. She's a recipient to the length and to the length and to the width. Ketsuras a hay, like a hay coming from a yud. We started with a yud. When she's on the upper level of me, the higher level of me, opposite of yam, she's still only a yud. But then that yud expands and becomes a hay. What's a hay? An expansion horizontally and an expansion vertically. Oy bays, or like the bays of Bereshis. Bays is a house. It's got 3, right? Now she can receive the light of the father. Bishvil tolda, for the sake of giving birth, nikra bayis, then she's called a house. A woman is called a home as well. Beisaizu ishtai, the woman is called a home. Like it says, Bechachma, with wisdom, yivne bayis, is built the house. With wisdom a house is built. The deeper meaning, Chachma gives the energy to Bina, and Bina creates a house out of it, a whole structure out of it. And that's what the Zohar says, to create a heichal, to create a chamber, biru'usei, with his desire. And remember we said earlier that this power for Bina to dissect and to open, to unlock Chachma, some might argue that she's much weaker than Chachma. All she does is take what Chachma has and opens it up. So what's the big deal? No. The very fact that Chachma, everything is hidden, and Bina can open it, means that there's a certain superiority to Bina over Chachma. Chachma must keep the energy in a very concentrated point. Bina has the ability to expand. That's because Bina has a certain quality rooted higher than Chachma. Because this structure of Bina is rooted bekeser, in the crown. Shua Ratzon, which is, we know generally, keser, crown, is considered the level of will. And the sages say, where do you see that Bina is rooted in such a lofty place of keser? Sages say, Hakol taloi b'mazel. Sages say that everything needs luck. It's amazing how all these teachings of the sages that seem to be so simple have such deep meaning behind it. The simple meaning of the sages say everything needs to be lucky. Afilu Sefer Torah behechel. Even a Sefer Torah has to have mazel. You tell a person you should have good mazel. What's that? People know. Some people have good mazel. Some people, they don't have the mazel. It's like being at the right place at the right time. And there are some people that they always work out to be at the right place at the right. They always win raffles. They always win lotteries. They're always at the right moment. They're successful wherever they go. There's like a certain luck that they have. It's called having a good mazel. And there are those that are what we call ashla mazel. Wherever the mazel is, they're always next door. They always miss the mazel. Right? Okay. So we say everything is dependent on good mazel. Even a Torah, a Sefer Torah. Why? If you go to shul, you'll see that there are certain Torahs that are always taken out. For some reason, they're the lucky ones. They always read in them. Then there's always one or two Sefer Torahs in a shul that are in the back. No one ever takes them out. Besides Simchas Torah, when they dance with the Torah. All year long, they sit there lonely, unread. So you see, even a Sefer Torah is dependent on Mazel. Why this one, yeah, not one, I don't know. For some reason, they decided to read in this one every Shabbos. And the other one sits lonely. That's the simple meaning, the sages are saying. But there's a much deeper meaning. Everything, the sages are speaking on levels upon levels. There's no words that they say that are just cute. It's deep significance. Torah is chachma. Torah emanates from Sefer Heichal. Sefer Torah is chachma. Heichal, for the Torah, that's the bina. Hakol talu b'mazel afila Sefer Torah shebeheichal means mazel is keser. Keser is called mazel because mazel comes from the word drip, 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 drip. From keser, from the Ein Sof, there is a drip of energy flow. And so everything is hanging, everything talu b'mazel is rooted in mazel, afila Sefer Torah shebeheichal, which means bina, which is related to heichal, is reluded. It could even be that Sefer Torah also means bina. Sefer is bina. It's a discussion, not for now. And it's all dependent on Mazel, which is the idea of Keser. Shunakudis Abba behechal ema, which the Sefer Torah is the point of Abba in the Hechal, in the chamber of Bina, which is explained elsewhere, but that's not the main topic over here. So now, once she is structured and she can receive, Shadali is Bina diyuknidalei mamish. So when she's now pregnant, who is she pregnant with? His child. And the child that is going to be born is going to resemble him, is going to be an image of him. Pidish kineskalal, like we said earlier, but Pidish ki Merosh Tzurim. We said earlier in the explanation of the words Merosh Tzurim at the beginning of the tops of mountains, I see him. Shahabina nikra tzur ilah. The bina is called the supernal tzur. Tzur can mean a rock, strong one. Tzur can also mean the artist. Bina is the supernal artist because all of the universe is all structured in bina. Kamashakasav ain't tzur kelokeinu. There is no tzur elokeinu. Elokeinu, we said, is bina. Chachma is called havaya. There's no tzur, there's no designer like Elokeinu, like the power of Bina that designs the cosmos, right? Avol, but even though she designs the design, where does she receive the drop of ink from? That she receives from. She can't design anything on her own. She needs to receive the potential from her husband. And in the ink is the potential of the entire art. It's all there in that drop of ink. Aval hi mekabela satzi, or she receives this image, may oir Abba, from the light of the Father. Shenikra Rosh Tzurim. She's Tzur, and he's called Rosh, the head of the Tzurim, of the artist. Kamashal Tipas HaMoiled, and like in the birth process of a man and a woman, the seminal drop, Shemitztayer Bebeten De'ema, even though the mother is the one that is the designer, in 9 months she's designing and creating from nothing. She's creating a magnificent human being. But she's creating it b'dayim alay mamish, similar to the father. Like it says, Vayulad, and he gave birth b'demusay ketzalmay, in his image. V'kach, so too, b'binyan bayis b'bina. When you structure the house in bina, achar shemakabel les ma'or abba, after she receives from the light of father. Sharali is bina b'diyukne da'or abba, she can build up this child in the image of the light of her husband, of the father, mamish. This is the ibur, this is the pregnancy of the Ze'er Anpin, which Ze'er Anpin are the 6 emotions, which is godliness already in a form of 6 days, a form of the emotions that are driving creation, It is really in the form of the level of Father, which is pre-emotion, pre-everything. It's just a droplet of the infinite. It's in the image of the light of Father Mamish, like it says, Ma Shemoy, Ma Shem Benoi. Ma is his name, Ma is the name of his son, which a few weeks ago in a mimer I explained it from the Pasuk, that it really is a question that someone is asking me, did someone else ever create the worlds? No, it's talking about Moshe Rabbeinu, talking about the greatness of Moses. And it's saying, is there anybody that's like him? If yeah, tell me, Mashamo, what's his name, and what's the name of his son? Tell me something. If there's anybody who can compare to Moses, to Moshe, Mashamoy, what's his name? What's the name of? That's the simple. But Chassidus always has a Ma Shemoy. That Ma is his name. Chachma is called Ma 45. We discussed a little bit about this on the Monday class. You can listen to that. It's called the Bannered Legions. We discussed a little bit about the power of 45, what it means. Koyach Ma, the power of Chachma. But we say the power of Chachma is his name, Chachma, but that power of Ma, of Koyach Ma, is also imprinted in his son. Who's the son? The Ze'er Anpin has of the father. Kenis Klial Barichos, as we explained earlier, V'dai Lamev. V'apik de yukne de lebe de yukne de ema. When he brings forth Chachma, who's the main power in this birth, even though the mom does all the work, the power for it is all the father. When he brings forth his child, he shares his child with mom in the sense that she adds her imprint as well. So when the child comes out, he's reflecting both father and mother. Pirish ki oid abba, the light of father, who ikar hamoiled is the primary one that is causing the birth. The apik diyuk and hamidois, and he brings forth the image of the midois, of the zeir anpin, of the emotions of the zeir anpin, b'diyuk delay in his image. V'gam b'diyuk de ime, and also in the image of the mother. Kenes klial, b'tchilas hamaymer, like we said in the beginning of the mimer, the mesitra de ema, that from the side of the mother, itmatach it expands. Okanal betzir oisa aleph, like the image of, remember we said the letter of the aleph, which is the emergence of the ze'er anpin, which is called the Israel, which is called the aleph, that there's input from two yuds, from the yud of the top, that's chachma, and input from the yud of the bottom, which is ima, together it going into the middle, into the vav. Shegam b'chenes bina mamsheches bevav, that the bina is also imparting and delivering into the vav. Shebe'emtza mal mata l'mayla, she's going upward and infusing into him. Kedimyan avlad, just like a baby. Hanoilad mishitav zachar nekeva, just like a baby that's born from the combination of male and female. Sheyesh by mitzur shneim, and that's why he has within him from both. Vezeh pirish bina, that's hinted to in the word bina itself, the child that comes from father and mother, because the word bina has the word ben. Ben means a son. But the son, Yud K, in the word Bina, you also have a Yud and a Hey. Yud is Chachma, Hey is Bina. He's a son of both. The Chachma Bina v'dai lamev, and then is enough to those who understand. Mi. So now the Zohar continues. What does mi mean? The reisha Yud, that's the head, the Yud. This pashit, but when it expands down, le'izbano, to be built. Bepshita the chadei chala, first in one heichal, and then in two. Remember we spoke about that, so he explains. It's referring to what it said earlier. The Amar mi, that miyahu nekude ila reisha. It's that first point, where everything is still combined as one. But later it emerges outward to become a full-fledged structure. Shu yud the chachma, which is the yud of chachma. Imina yud, and from the yud nasa oirech v'reichev becomes a length, the vertical line, and the reichev, and the breadth, which is the horizontal line, shalahei of the hay. Al yedei koitza tachten shaboy. From the yud, where does the hay come from? The very, very little, look at a letter yud, you have a little point, a little thorn going up, and a little thorn going down. From the bottom point that goes down, that's the source for Bina's expansion. As explained in Pardes, some of Makarmacher explained elsewhere. And this is what he says over here, ispashet, it expands, leispano, to be built, Ma'akoitza tachten, from the lower point of the yud, uliyos kemoi binyan, to be a full structure, la'oirech, to length, v'roichev, and breadth. Or Masha Kasav, and this that it says, Masha Amar, this that the Zohar says, Lebei Sitrin Bani, it's been built up to two sides. Ki makom makom loy nikra hechala, it's not really called yet a full-fledged chamber, mamish. It's not, it's two sides it will be built, but it's not yet fully called a full structure. Ela katsir ois beis, when will it be a full structure? When it's the image of a beis. What does a base have? A base is closed off from three sides. That's already a sukkah has to have three walls, right? Something, an enclosure of three is called a house. When you only have two, it's not really a home. It's not livable. Mukif megimel ruchais. It has to be closed from three directions. Sheyesh by beis sitrin, which once you have three sides, you have two sides, which is right and left. Mamish, liyamin u'lismoil, right and left. Masha and kimbitzir dalis, when you only have the letter dalid, not a beis. A dalid only has a roof and one side. Behei beli regel, and especially what? When the dalid of the hay, but it doesn't have yet the left little leg, so it doesn't have any left wall. It's just these two walls. Ein sham beis sitrin, you don't have two sides. Yamin u'smoil, you don't have right and left. Rak oirech v'roichev, only length and breadth. Bovad ve'ein zeh binyan gomer, it's not a complete structure. So the intention is that it should be built on both sides. But the beginning of its emergence is only on one side. But the beginning of the way it expands is to one side. Katsir hadal is like the image of the dalit. And only afterwards is pashat latrein sitrin, it expands to both sides, mamish. Shem b'chinas chesed gevura v'hadas. Chesed is on one side, because the child that's going to be born is the ze'er anpin. It has chesed, and it has gevura. And the roof is the das, because the das is the source of all the six emotions. HaKoilalam, v'hadas HaKoilalam, and the das that includes them both. V'oisi is Omer, or Emor. Eish Mayim Ruach. Emor is the acronym. Eish, which is the left side, Gevura. Mayim, which is the right side, which is Chesed. And the roof is the Ruach, the wind, that's Das. Day to day, Yabia will bring forth Omer. So Yom and Yom is Chachma and Bina. Yabia brings forth Omer, Eish Mayim Ruach, which is the full structure, which has two sides. Now, he didn't explain psychologically or a meaning. What does it mean that first, when it's built, it builds only on the right, and only later does it develop on the left? He didn't explain, and I'm not going to add my own explanation because I don't know. He didn't give that. In his explanation, he doesn't discuss that, at least not in this discourse, so I don't know. And from this, it is structured, the structure of the midot in Bina. In Bina, shua regel shebehei, which is the left leg on the hay, gamkein. So the midos, just like Bina itself, has a right, a chesed, and a gevura, and a das. Her child that's going to be born, the midot, will also have the regel of the hay gamkin. Here it says dalid madregas, 4 levels, but there's a footnote which says it's probably supposed to be read 3 levels, which makes sense because that's what we're talking about: right, left, and das. Betzir aleph, the aleph has 3. A chachma element, a right side, a bina element, a left side, which is chesed and gevura, and a das, which runs in the middle. Now, once we have the whole idea, how chachma and bina together create these midot, these emotions, which are the configuration of emotions, which are the cornerstone, which are the foundation of the cosmos, of the creation. But again, as we spoke earlier, emotions themselves don't create the world. It has to go through the medium of speech, which speech is the next level of the divine, which is Malchus, which is called the Shekhinah, which is kingship, a whole new lower level, which is the feminine level of speech. So now he's saying, as the boy emerges, which are the emotions that are the internal element of creation, the external element, which are the letters, the words, which are the malchus, are also created simultaneously. The afal gav, and even though the apikli yisrael, the iuvav, even though what's created in the hay is the vav, but in the bottom of the vav, don't fail to notice that at the bottom of the vav there is a twin sister, and that's the little yud that's at the bottom of the vav. The iuvav oivav apik lenukva dilei kechada. He's also bringing forth his shidduch, his potential match, his future wife is now being born as a sister together. Pidish, Pchenas ibor zah de'ema, when you have this pregnancy of the ze'er anpin, be'ema in the mother, de'ema of the mother, shu avav shebetoicha hay, which is the vav that's in the hay, kenis kaliyah, bepidish umegvois asherenu, in the pirush of ugvois, which are the hills, which is the mother, which is bina asherenu, who already can see, and it's not just seeing, it's stepping out. It's sticking its foot out, which we said out means really malchut, because malchus is really where energy of God exits out. Which is the root of the building, the structure of the feminine element of the Zeiranpin Kenas Kalal Barichus, malchus de Tevuna, which is the malchut element, the kingship element of Tevuna, which is the beginning of letters. Bina is already producing. It's not real words, but it's already the subtleties of letters. Tevuna, ben ubas. That's why in the word tevuna, which is another word for bina, bina as she's mothering, is called tevuna. And in the word tevuna, you have the word, tevuna means understanding, but it also contains within it ben, beis nun, and also contains within it beis, the same beis, that's the beis for the nun, is also the beis used to combine with the letter taf, which means bas. So ben, son, and daughter. Both of them are born equally, simultaneously in the womb of the mother. They're twins. It says, me is mom, as we spoke earlier, me is the level of me. Yetencha will give you ka'achli as a brother to me. That's the Shekhinah speaking, that's Knesset Yisrael, that's the Shekhinah speaking to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is male, and you're saying, me has given you as my brother. You happen to be my husband too, but you're also my brother, because we were born together. And that's why sometimes it says, but even though Bina is, Malchus is born as well from this union of Chachma and Bina, and therefore Bina is responsible for the birth of the boy and of his sister, yet the girl is more associated with the father than even the boy. The boy is associated more with mother. It's a combination that we spoke about many times, that when parents have, you see it even in human relationships, that fathers have a deeper connection to their daughters and mothers have a deeper connection to the son. There's a certain cross-gender attachment that works. So primarily, Malchus is a daughter to him more than he is to the mother. That's why it says, she's my sister. Avram speaks about Sarah, and she says, she's my wife, but she's also my sister. When he was excusing why he called Sarah his sister, she was really his wife. And there she wasn't physically his sister. He said, because she's my cousin, so it's like a sister. She's actually his niece. He married his niece, Sarah. And she says, it's like my sister or whatever. Bas Avi. She's the daughter of my father. She's a granddaughter of my father. That's what he meant. But she's a daughter, but not the daughter of my mother. So you see that spiritually, what does that mean? That Malchus, the Shekhinah, feminine element, speech, in the whole world of Olam HaDibur, is a daughter of my father, not my mother, meaning more connected to father than to mother. Then later I married her. That's the idea that we're learning over here, that the Ze'er Anpin and the Shekhinah and Malchus are born together, and then later they get married, which means he influences her. We'll soon see. It's explained in Zohar, the root of Malchus, of the female, is from the lights of Chesed, of kindness, of Chachma, of Abba, father, Dafka. Ki Abba Yasid Barata, because the real source of words is not in the intellect, in the understanding, but in the right side of the mind, in the pure energy that has no definitions. Dafka there is the source for letters, which is a strange idea, but that's the way it is. Where do you find that? It says, it was prepared. We turned over the page, the last page of the whole discourse. We've been learning already so many times, so many weeks. Like it says, that with kindness, which is chachma is called kindness because it's on the right side, the kisei, the throne is malchus, called the throne, is established. So you see that dafka, the lowest, which is malchus, is rooted in the highest. V'nikra bas avi, she's called the daughter of my father, lagabaza, to lagabi ze'er anpin, to the ze'er anpin, she's called the daughter of the father. V'loy bas imi, not the daughter of my mother. V'zeu sha'amar, and that's why the Zohar says, va'apik lenukva delay, he causes his son's wife, his daughter-in-law, so to speak, he brings her forth, va'azmenis minei, and it becomes prepared from him, ligabe, for him, for his son. Pereshahuchna, she is prepared, for huzmana, and designated, mitchila, from the very beginning, liois loyla bazug, to be to the 6 emotions a wife. That means that the energy of the divine emotion should flow into the divine verbiage, divine words, to create. That God should be able to articulate words of love in which he creates the universe, words of discipline, which he creates the universe, words of compassion, which he creates the universe. These are the emotions flowing into the words, the speech, which is the marriage between Ze'er Anpin and the Shekhinah, which is all prepared already from Chachma and Bina, from a much higher state. Like we find even physically, down here, everything in this world is a resemblance of these dynamics, of these great, powerful, mystical ideas. The sages say about our human spouses as well, that 40 days before a man is born, a boy is born, he is already announced above. That means before he comes into this world, he's already announced from above who is going to be his bashert, who's going to be his wife. Mem Yoim Koidem HaYetzirah Machrizin, they announce Bas Ploini, the daughter of so-and-so, will be. Now she's usually younger, or it's more common that she's younger than him. Not always, but, and so she's not even in the world yet at the time when they announce. So they don't say she will marry him, they say the daughter of so-and-so will marry, because at this point, he's already at least a fetus. She's not even here yet. And you say, she, the daughter of so-and-so, will marry him. Like it says, Vayivan Hashem Elokim, that Hashem structured Es Hatzela, the rib. And so who structured, who prepared it? Hashem Elokim, father and mother. Primary role over here plays the father, like we spoke earlier, but the mother is also involved in the creation. So, Vayivan Hashem Elokim, that Hashem Elokim created Es Hatzela, that's the feminine element to match and to complement the Adam, the man, the boy that they're creating. Tiknu, the Abba v'Imo tiknu l'nukva. They're preparing the nukva, the female. V'ka'anoma apik al Abba. Over here, however, the Zohar is emphasizing the father's role more. Dafka mitam, because we said earlier, Shanikra Bas Avi, she's called the daughter of the father. So the Alter Rebbe is dealing with the subtleties of the Zohar. He's looking at all the subtleties and explaining them, because every word is so perfect. Ubahi to the Or Abba, and in that expansion, I think, in that extension of the light of Father, the Ispashet Bebina, in which he is giving to Bina, that means in the same intimacy, in the same communion, in which he is transmitting from the seed to create, that she should take it and create children with it, her son, it's not just the boy, also the daughter. Dispashet bebina letrain sitrin, to two sides. Chesed de gevura, apik letarvayu, lezun kechada. He's creating male and female at the same time, which is called chesed and gevura. Because he's energy and she's vessel. So she's gevura, vessels are more restrictive, and energy together. V'hainu vav k. That's really that's the yud k who are getting married, the yud and the hey of God's name, and together at the same time, the vav and the hey are being born. The vav are the 6 emotions. Hey is malchus. They're merged together. With the ka, with yud k, tzur olamim, he creates worlds. What are the worlds? The 2 worlds. Alma de tchura, the male world, the alma de nukva, and the female world. Ubechol zeh misparish, lashon hapasuk. With all this, we can understand the meaning of the verse. Me, the level of me, which is chachma and bina, as they are totally one. As we spoke earlier, bina, as she's still receiving the light of chachma. Mana over here means not counted, but prepared, from the word vayiman, to prepare. Afar Yaakov, the earth of Yaakov. What does that mean? Pirish. Mi mana, the chachma shebebina, the chachma of bina. Again, mainly it's chachma who's responsible for this. But it's the chachma in bina. Mana, it prepares lizun, both the male and the female. The hainu, afar Yaakov, the earth of Yaakov. Kamosha Kosov, he's proving that Malchus is called earth. It says, Asher bekarka hamishkan, the earth that's in the floor of the Mishkan, which is referring to Malchus, as it's explained. Esther, sages refer to Esther as being earth. Esther Hamalka, she represents the Shechina. The sages say about her Karka Olam, she's considered earth. Over there, the question is, how could Esther have sinned? Because she married a Gentile king. Here she's a kosher Jewish woman, and we know her to be a very righteous woman. And here she married Achashverosh. Again, it was against her will, but how did it happen? So, and a person is supposed to give here's the thing. There are 3 cardinal sins that a person has to give their life, sacrifice their life, lay their life down, not to violate them. And one of them is Giloy Aroyas, immoral relationships, non-kosher relationships, which include for a Jew to marry a non-Jew, and a non-Jew right? So here, the question the sages ask, how could Esther have gone, she should have chosen to die. What do you mean? What would they do? Force her to Achashverosh. She could have, resisted until they had to kill her. And she needs to do that. So the sages say there's a difference between a man and a woman. A man, in a sexual encounter, a man is considered doing an action. And that's why there's a much greater, that it could be considered if he's having a relationship, it's considered that it's his will. He's doing it willfully. And when a woman is being forced, she's not considered participating in the action, so she could be considered a passive. She's being raped in a sense, so it's not her participating. Because she's not really doing anything. It's just happening to her in this sense, and that's why a woman is not obligated to die, not to be a man if he's being forced to have an illegal has to allow himself to be killed. The woman not. So, and that's what and the sages use the term. They say Esther is karka, like earth. Earth doesn't do anything. It's just something is being planted in it. That's the idea. The earth didn't participate in the thing being planted. That's the idea. But spiritually, it's the idea that earth represents Malchus. Okay. So now we come to the last passage of the Zohar. We understood Mimana Afar Yaakov. Okay. And what does he mean when he concludes Umispar and counts as Roiva Yisrael? A quarter of Israel. So this is really, really very special. So let's read what the Zohar says, and then let's see if we can understand it. Umispar Yisrael, a very short little passage in the end. Umispar Yisrael, he counts the Rova, the quarter of Israel. Roiva Yisrael, the quarter of Israel, Razadah, this secret, Begina Rebbe Yismasar. Only in the merit of Rebbe, I guess he means Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, only in the merit of Rebbe, which is Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, again, I think so, this was given over. Such a deep secret over here. Zakoch Ulkoch. How fortunate is your lot that such a deep secret could be revealed. Roiva Yisrael. What does Roiva Yisrael mean? Revius, a quarter, min medidu de Yisrael. From the measurement of Israel. Iu bris, which this is the bris. Bris over here means the bris milah, the yesod. Yesod is the male organ of procreation, and that's called bris. So it's saying that's a quarter of Israel. Amai ikra roiva. Why is it called roiva? Eloshiyura de gufa, the measure of the body, arba brises, is 4 times the bris. So the genitalia of the man is a quarter of the guf of the person himself. Have a b'shiyura delay. So we're going to understand this is a very deep mystical. I know it's talking about something physical, but it obviously reflects, everything in the physical is a reflection of the godly, even one's sexuality. And primarily, that's actually a very, very, very deep power in the cosmos, the highest power, really. So that's a quarter of the body. What is it physically? The bris is a quarter of the measurement of the body, and therefore that means umispar, and to count roiva Yisrael. So because here's the thing, we just spoke about the emergence of the female, which is malchus, and the emergence of the male energy and vessel. But now you got to bring energy and vessel together. How are you going to bring energy and vessel together? That's through their intimacy. They're going to get married intimacy. And through their intimacy, the emotions are going to be transmitted into the words. And that's compared to a sexual relationship. Now, in that relationship, the sexual relationship happens through the genital of the man. And that's considered roiva, a quarter of Israel. What does that mean? The emotions that are going to pour and transmit into the vessel is only a quarter of the emotion, because every influence, from influencer to influencee, teacher to student, a lot of the information remains hovering over the mind of the student. The student can't take all that information in, because it's very rich. If it's a real teacher and a student, the teacher is worthy being a teacher. That means he has much more information than the student can handle. So when he's transmitting, only a quarter of the information goes in. And that's why it says it takes a student 40 years to really figure out what the teacher taught. Every teaching you get, you'll really only understand it 40 years later. It'll simmer on your head for 40 years, and then the end, Moshe tells the Jewish people, you're only, at the end of 40 years, you're only now beginning to get what we got at Sinai. 40 years later, you're beginning to get what I told you. It takes 40 years. Why? Because you don't get the full dosage. And you can see that in the that's reflected in the physical intimacy of a man and a woman. Because what the man is actually giving to the woman in a way that is actually entering her space is a quarter of his body. So that represents the idea that a quarter of the influence is passing from the influencer to the recipient. So, again, when we're speaking about the entire emergence of the cosmos, the emergence of the HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and then the Shekhinah, but nothing's going to happen unless there is an intimacy. The flow requires from him to give his energy into her, and that's when it enters into the building blocks of creation, into speech. If God has no excitement, he has nothing to talk about. In other words, the speech is motivated by excitement. So if there's some excitement that flows into the speech, then there can be words. And with the 10 utterances, God created the world, creates and continues to sustain the world. There has to be some energy flow. There has to be some excitement coming from God. But and that's called this intimacy, and the quarter of it. And all of this is prepared, meaning the not just male and female, but also the genitalia, which connects the two, is also created by me. Me created this entire system. In other words, from the very beginnings of Chachma and Bina, this very, very lofty state, it has designed an entire system of how the energy can flow into the creation. And Bilam sees this entire structure as the Jewish people and the cosmic flow of energy that flows through them into the world. And therefore he says, what are you thinking to mess with the Jewish people? You think I can uproot them? There's nothing in the cosmos that works without them. So I'm going to before we go back inside, I'm going to say to all the haters of Israel, you can all go jump in the lake. You can hack your head in the wall from today till tomorrow. We're here to stay. We're here forever. We're going to have the entire land of Israel with the Temple Mount. And anybody that doesn't like it, too bad. Ultimately, it would be beautiful if everybody can appreciate what we're learning over here and recognize. Then the people would understand the reason for this deep, deep envy of Israel. Hatred and envy. It comes from an envy. But when one appreciates that the Jewish people are not here for themselves, but they're here to bring all this illumination and light and ultimate godly flow into the creation, then the hatred will turn into an irrational, an insatiable love, which is going to be in the Messianic age. So, may we merit to see that soon. Now let's learn his interpretation of what this means and how he explains it. So he says, what does all of this mean? We have to be analyzed. Remember, we're dealing a lot with the shapes of letters. We discussed the yud and the hey and the vav in the hey, the vav that's inside the hey, the dalid, the bays, right? The aleph, we had a whole structure in the aleph. Now he's going to focus on another letter, the gimmel. You see, malchut, which is the world of speech, is the dalid, because dalid comes from the word dal, poor. Malchus doesn't have anything. She's just potential words that need to be filled with content. Dal means poor. Who's giving energy to the dalid? Her husband. Who's that? The gimmel. Gimmel is called gimmel because the word gimmel means gomel. Gomel means to give. To give to who? To give to the poor. In Hebrew, the word for giving to the poor is called gemilas chesed. You're doing a kindness. Gomel means to give. We say in davening, Gomel chasadim tovim. God is always giving. So the gimmel is the gomel. Now, when you look at the gimmel and the dalid, you see that gimmel, the way the gimmel looks like, it's a vav, literally a vav, and at the bottom it has a yud sticking out forward. What that means is it's the teacher, the influencer, going to the student. Because when it comes to tzedakah, you're not supposed to wait till the poor man comes. The real best way of giving tzedakah is before they even ask you, go and you give. The giver goes to the receiver. Like God does. He creates the world. He didn't wait till we ask to be created. He initiates. He gives. So many things he gives us before we even can dream of it. He gives us. We only notice it when we're lacking, then we cry out. But God gives. And that's hinted to in the bottom of the gimmel. The gimmel is walking to the dalet. He's now going to give a mystical explanation in the shape of the gimmel. Because he's going to show that in the gimmel, the little yud that's sticking out on the bottom is a quarter of the size of the entire gimmel. There is a vav. And the size of the gimmel that actually is the leg that protrudes outward, that's the step of the foot that's going out. That's a quarter. Why? Because in concept, that's like we spoke earlier, that which extends from the mashpia to the recipient is a quarter of the body, like in the physical relationship. That's what that leg of the gimmel stands for. And that means roiva Yisrael, a quarter of Israel. Israel is the entire gimmel, the whole vav. We have to first preface an idea. When we look at the letter gimel. Masha amru gimel, the sages say the word gimel means gimel dalim. The gimel is kind. It goes to give to the dal, to the poor. The idea is gimel yedua. The image of the form of a gimel is known. Shu koilo, it includes beis oisios. It includes two letters, vav, the yud. It has a vav and then it has a yud on the bottom. The beginning of the way the gimel comes and emerges, Nimshach ketzuras ois vav. It's like a letter vav. Mamish. Va'achar kach b'soif zeh vav. At the end of this vav, mamshichem emenu k'moi ois yud kazeh. You draw from the vav a yud at the bottom. Kazeh like this, gimmel. Over here in the mimer, he has a picture, an image of a large gimmel. We need to understand the reason. Why is a gimmel 2 letters, a vav with a yud? Why is it at the bottom? There's a letter yud. The idea is as follows. In this letter vav, in every place, the vav indicates an energy that's going, a line coming from the top to the bottom. From the influencer to the influenced, from cause to effect. And that's what the image is. It's a line going down. The influencer, the cause is higher, the effect is lower. The beginning is a yud. A yud means the point of the essence of the influencer. That's your space. And your extension downward. Now, a vav gets narrower, because every time the influencer is giving to the influence, you have to narrow the energy. You're going to give too much, it's going to overwhelm the recipient, it's going to bust their vessel, it's going to blow a fuse. It gets narrower. This is by way of analogy. It's like the influence of ideas, of which is coming from the teacher to the student. This, it descends and it travels, this influence, from the intelligence of the teacher, ela Talmud, to the student, migvaya, from a high place, lenamach, to a low place. We see in the literal sense that this oir, this light, and this influence that's going from the teacher to the student, the student cannot receive even that which is coming to him. The student can't behold and to absorb and take in everything the teacher is teaching, like it is by the teacher. The sages say that a student, a man, does not know the mind of his teacher. It takes 40 years. You have to marinate in the teaching that you taught, that your teacher taught you for 40 years, until you really get it, the full depth of it. Because it's not yet absorbed and received in the mind, in the brains of the student. All the words of the teacher come to their depth, as they really are. That which the student gets at the beginning is only a teeny weeny, a small little part of it. V'ashar, and the rest of the teaching, the rest of the concept, the rest of the whatever idea, nisha remains al kli moyach hatalmid, hovering above the mind of the student, the vessels of the student, of the brain of the student, b'bchenas makif, in an encompassing state, behelam. In other words, they sense that there's something in these words that they didn't really get. There's some deeper meaning here. Because every influencer and influenced, or cause and effect, lo yuklit b'kli ha'olul, the effect will not absorb in its container, rak chelik echad, only one little portion, mechelke hashefa, from a little piece of the influence, shenem sheches, that is drawn mina ela, from the source, from its cause, v'loy kula, not the whole. The recipient does not swallow the teacher, does not absorb the teacher. Because the recipient, the keli, the vessel of the influenced, cannot contain, can only receive a portion, one portion. And how much of it is that portion? It is known, and every influencer and recipient. That the light and the influence that is already going, which means that which does enter into the space of the recipient, and is drawn from the influencer, v'nifrad, and actually gets disconnected from him, from the influencer, elam to the recipient, v'nichnas latoicha, and that which does enter into the space of the recipient, hu anikra b'chinas yesoid, that which from the teacher, from the influencer, goes into the student, is called Yesod. Yesod is the level of bonding, where the two bond, where the two are becoming one. It's called Yesod de Duchra. So from the influencer's perspective, that which they are imparting, and it's kind of extending from them actually to be received in the recipient, that's called the Yesod element, the bonding element of the male. And that's like in the physiology of the person, that the genitals of the man is belita bar, is protrusion outward, because that's what it represents. He's the giver, so it's going out from him to the recipient. The Kabbalah's kliya makabel, and the recipient of the keli, of the vessel, of the receiver, ba'atzmo, the receiver, the student that's taking in la'or v'shefazos, to this light and this influence, nikra b'chenes yesod. It's also called yesod. That's the point of connection, because yesod means bonding, the foundation or the bounding element, the nukva of the female. But the yesod element of the woman is related to the, as you see in the physical, as relates to the genital of the woman. It's an indent, v'toich, and a space, like a cavity, an inwardness, v'cholol, and a hollow to receive. V'nimtza, and it comes out, mechavnim, and the two are equivalent. Toich v'cholol kliya makabel, the inwardness and the space of the vessel of the recipient, in midas or v'shefa, with the measure of the light and the influence shahoylech that goes min mashpia from the influencer shenikri yesod chura, the equivalent. We know even in construction and building, when you talk about a bolt and a thing, they refer to it as male and female. The protrusion is the male, and the space that enters is female, right? That's what it is. Kilefi erech hashkia, an equivalent to the amount of the space, of the inwardness of the recipient, kach erech hablita, to that degree is the protrusion of the. It's like not everybody's a student to receive from every teacher. Some teachers very, very lofty and very powerful ideas, very advanced ideas. The student doesn't have such a wide recipient space to receive. So they need to receive from a lower teacher, from someone with less to give, from less. So that's in kach erech hablita shenichnas al teicha chalol. So is the protrusion that goes into the space. Kedimyan chalol recha manukva, which is all even expressed in the physical dimension of a man and woman relationship, where the chalal recha manukva, where the space of the womb of the female bishkia is indented lefi midas eirech blitas ever azachar, in accordance to the protrusion of the man. Kamosha Amru, as the sages even say when they speak about the laws of nidot, a woman has to check inspection in her body if she sees any blood. So it discusses the idea ad makom. It says Shashamish does dash until this place that the male's genital kind of goes to where it reaches. So in that sense, you see that there is an equivalence between the two. Now, the makabel, the recipient, is, even though they have a space for the transmitter, but it's not to take in the entire person. It's only to receive what they can receive, which is what only a portion of it. That's why it's expressed in the idea that which the giver can impart of himself to her is not his entire body, but just, as we said earlier, a quarter of himself. The sheer katan, and a small amount to sheer chelik revius. That's what it means. It's a quarter bavad mina mashpia, from the influence. Ki yedua, as it is known, bepidush, and he's going to explain what that means in terms of sfirot and attributes. Ki yedua, as it is known, bepidush loishe edreitzayin roivtzim Allah. As is known, this idea is something that the Zohar discusses as a deep secret, where it discusses where Yaakov, was coming when he was fleeing his brother Esau, and he was going to Mesopotamia, and he came to Haran, and outside there was a well, and it says next to the well there were 3 flocks of sheep, and they were laying there, and there was a big stone, and he needed to move the stone away, and then the sheep can go drink from the well, and so on and so forth. Mystically, the well is called Malchut. Malchus is called Be'er, it's a well. It represents the woman, it represents that space, that recipient of space. 3 flocks of sheep, roftzim aleh, are hovering over her. Actually means crouching over her. Simply it meant that they were all laying on the floor. They were waiting to drink from it. But the idea rovates means it's upon that. So mystically it's explained that this is referring to the hashpa'ah, the flow that goes from the mashpia to the recipient, from the influencer. What is he giving? 3 flocks represent netzach, hod, yesod. There are 4, there is the structure of the mashpia is chesed, gevura, teferes, and then netzach, hod, yesod. Netzach, hod, yesod is called a quarter of the entire structure. From the 3 groups of sheep, it indicates that what is being transmitted to Malchus is just the Netzach Hod Yesod element. It's called Nehi, the Netzach Hod Yesod, the most external element. Why is that a quarter? The size of the quarter. Really, you can say it's a quarter because you have Chesed, Gevurah, Teferes, and each one is a whole. And this Netzach Hod Yesod is considered a quarter. But really, when we say a quarter, means it's a size of the 4th of the entire. So we're going to see, you actually count one more. Das, because Das is the mother of all the midos, the pnimius of all the midos. So Das, Chesed, Gevurah, Teferes. And the Netzach Hod Yesod, and primarily Yesod, is only 1 compared to all the other 4. So it's as we said before, the bris is a quarter of the size of the entire body. And he explains it over here. Shehu b'chinas Netzach Hod Yesod sheroiv tzimah b'chinas hamalchus. Ki hamalchus shiura rak chelik revius mizah. Malchus, her shear, her amount of recipients, only a quarter. V'zeh inyan, and that's why we find in the libations where they would pour, the pouring of the libations on the altar. Altar is Malchus. You see, we're saying Malchus is so many things symbolized. It's a well. Before we said it's the earth. Sometimes it's the sea. So many things that Malchus represent. But one of the elements of Malchus is the altar. The Mizbeach is Malchus. The libations that were poured represents this transmission, this intimacy from HaKadosh Baruch Hu with the Shekhinah. The actual pour, how much did they pour? Revius ahin. It was a quarter of a hin. That represents the idea of a quarter. V'niska revius ahin. V'im ke'muvim is that. It's understood from Yebehechrach shebchinas yesoid ditchura, that the yesod, since the malchus can only receive a quarter, so you have to say the yesod of the male, which is what actually goes over into her, can't be bigger than that, meaning that's what gets separated from the influencer. Lehiskabel, to be received, ulihikolate, and to be absorbed, the yesod the nukva, the yesod element of the female canal, hugam ken chelik revius bilvad, there's only a quarter. Miklolas hashefa, from the general shefa, hanimshach mena mashpia, that's coming from the influence. Ma'achar shamidas beis yesodis alalu, since the 2 yesodos, the tchar v'nukva echad, have to be equal. That's how they can match up. V'hanukva shira, and her shear is only chelik revi. She's only her spate, her structure is a quarter from him. Sharei nikra achas mitzaloisav. She's called one of his ribs. She's created from only one rib, which is a quarter of him. V'shiyura de gufa de za dalet pamim kacha. And the shear of the guf, the body, the main torso, so to speak, of the Zeir Anpin is 4 times 1 rib. Because she can only, when she enclothes him, she's only enclothing a quarter of him, which is the Netzach Hod Yesod canal. And therefore, the actual transmission is considered, only roiva, a quarter. The Inyan Hu, and the idea is she'ein or v'shefa haniklat b'kliya makabel. The light and the influence that's being absorbed in the kalim and in the space of the recipient, Rak chelik revius, it's only a quarter. Meklalis or v'shefa, from the general light and the influence. Animshach min hamashpia, that's coming from the influence. V'zeu gam kein pirish v'niskoi, his libation revius ahin. It's only a quarter. Niskoi the tchura, his extension, it's only a quarter of him. Haniklat, that's being absorbed b'kli hamakabel in the space and in the vessel of the recipient. V'dar l'mev. All this will understand why a gimmel looks like that, because the yud that's going out, that's the part that is actually going over, and that's only a quarter of the gimmel. Yuvan in Tzurim gimmel, the Mevilamai, let's explained earlier, but Tzurim gimmel in the image of the gimmel. Sheroisha yud, its head is a yud, on the top is a yud. V'nim shach lamat, and it goes down. Now again, what he is giving is the entire gimmel. The gimmel is not only the end giving. He's giving his entire self. But how much could she take in? That's the question. How much can she absorb? As we said, most of it hovers above her, and only a little bit goes in. Therefore, the entire thing is called the gimmel. He's giving himself, just like in an intimacy. It's the entire person being close to her. But the actual connection is only in a part of him. Loshin goimel chesed la'ani, k'may gimel es chesadim. That his entire being is involved in the intimacy. V'umayim ezal gimel gemoil dalim, k'niskaliya. And when a teacher is teaching, they have to teach with their entire being. But the student is receiving a portion. Achayud shenimshach b'sayfay. The yud that protrudes out, that's drawn at the end, shel gimel ubchenes chelek nivdal, is what gets separated. Ma hashefa aklolus, from the general influence, asher nikletes, that can be contained, umiskabeles, and received, b'kli hamakabel, in the keli of the recipient. V'aynu chelek revi is bilvad, only a quarter. The gimel achalakim elyonim, and the three other parts, nisharu, remain ala makabel, on the recipient, b'pchenas makif. Remain on the recipient above in a level of makif k'niskaliyah. V'zeu anikra b'chenas yesoid d'tchura. And that is called, the yesod is what goes over k'niskaliyah. V'u'ayud, and that's the yud that breaks off. Hashanimshach v'nivdal, that gets drawn and separated, meregal avav, from the leg of the vav, lahala outward mimenu, dahaina letzad ois hadalid. Now the gimmel stands before the dalid. The gimmel is walking to the dalid. It's this relationship, it's this extension. Hasmucha elav, that's close to him. Lohoides al b'chenes or v'shefa zois, that this light and this shefa, hamiskabelas, that's being given over bimekabel into the recipient. Shu oisadalas, which is the letter dal. Now it's interesting, in the dalid there is a yud in the back. That's where the gimmel is putting its yud, up in the top of the dalid. The dalid is receiving it. From that yud, she absorbed. And then, where does it show up? She becomes pregnant from that dalid. From that gimmel, from that little point, from that little yud, and it shows up as the leg that later becomes in the left side of the dalid, which becomes a hay. So gimmel dalid hay. When the dalid becomes pregnant from the gimmel, she becomes a hay, and what she received from him becomes her child, becomes her baby. Ki yedua da makabel nikra dal. The makabel is called a dal. The less le megar meklum. She doesn't have anything. Ka'ani, like a poor man. V'dai lemev. Fortunate is the one that enlightens the dal. He gives to the dal, to the poor. That's the dal. She's just an empty vessel. To the length of she can, however, receive it. Which is drawn from the end of the leg of the vav. Which vav? The vav that's part of the gimmel. Shua yud shaboy, which is the yud. Va'ayud hazeh, and this yud maschil b'ktzei regel. This yud doesn't start at the top of it starts only at the bottom. Only at the bottom quarter of the gimmel. Not above. Mitamanal, as we said earlier. And afterwards, when it's finally received in the dalid, nasa hay, it becomes a hay. That's the yud that's in the hay. Which if you trace the yud that's inside the hay at the bottom, and you trace it back, it's in the end, the back of the dalid, and then trace it back even more, it's in the bottom of the gimmel. B'meuzi yasa shalom li, a pasuk in Isaiah. It says, if he will hold on to my strength, yasa shalom li, he will make peace to me. And then the pasuk continues, shalom yasa li. If you will hold on to my strength, yasa shalom li, will make peace to me. And then, shalom yasa li, peace he will make to me. So it mentions the verse repeats twice, shalom yasa li. So what does it mean? Shalom is Yesod. Yesod is called Shalom because Yesod is bonding, and peace means to connect two opposites, to connect. So Shalom is, Mu'uzi also is the strength which represents the concept of Yesod. Yesod has gevura to it. So Yachzik b'Mu'uzi means those who are holding on and bonding with me. Yasa Shalom li, that's the mashpia, the Yesod extending himself, lead to the makabel, to the recipient. Yasa will make, Shalom will make a connection, lead to me. But that's the mashpia giving, that's the gimmel giving to the dalit. And then Shalom Yasa li, the end of the pasuk, is that now the Yesod of the mashpia, after it transmitted and delivered to the recipient, now it's living within the recipient. That means that's after it was received by the recipient. That's Shalom Yasa li, peace will made to me. That's, as we said before, the dalit became pregnant from the gimmel. So it's a repeat. He's giving to me. That's him as he's giving to her, and then she's as she's receiving from him. That's the yud that's in the foot of the gimmel. The shalom yasali bevoyay lenukva, when it arrives at the female, shehu yud shebehei, which is the yud that's in the hay. Kamashakasav ashnei maskalel dal. That's the twice. V'zeu shama v'yadaita, you will know ki shalom oyavecha ohalecha. It's peace is your tent. You will know there's peace in your house. What does that mean? The deeper meaning, yadaita yediya das is the connection, which is done through shalom, which creates this peace. Or halecha, your tent is malchus. So again, malchus is also called the tent. Another thing that malchus is called. So shalom is the connection of yesod with malchus. V'hainu shalom, and this is also the meaning of shalom b'pamalya shalmayla. Sages speak of when it says twice shalom yasali, they say it will be peace in the heavenly abode, the shalom b'pamalya shamata, and peace below. One of the deeper meanings of it is the peace is in Yesod and the peace is in Malchus, because the connection happens on two levels. Once as the gimmel is giving to the dalit, and the other one as the dalit has received from the gimmel. So the dalit is called Pamalya Shalmata, the lower world, like he called it earlier, Ka Hashem Tzura Elamim, two worlds, the lower world and the higher world, the Vav K. Right? V'zeu shama ma oshev l'Hashem. King David says, who's Malchus, what can I return to God? Kol tagmulohi, all of his gimmel, olai is on me. I've received from his gimmel. He's pouring, giving me so much hashpah, so much intimacy, so much love. And now, with all of this, we can understand what the Zohar is saying. He counts the rova, the quarter of Israel. Rova Yisrael, it says, the Zohar says, a quarter of Israel. Revius, a quarter, min medida the Yisrael, from the measure of Yisrael. Yisrael is the complete emotional structure, which is bris, which a quarter, that's the bris. Pirish Yisrael ubchen is zeir anpin. Yisrael is the zeir anpin. Shu oiz vav, which is the letter vav. Kamashakasa bezoyar, which is the vav of the gimmel. Kamashakasa bezoyar stated in the Zoyar apasik v'nasatam li ois emes, you will give me a letter of truth. Ois, the Zohar says, da ois vav, that's the letter vav, which is the letter of truth. Li oisei koilel, why truth? Because truth is center. Truth always is the middle point. And since Ze'er Anpin is the full structure that includes the emotions to the right and emotions to the left, and it creates balance in the middle, Teferes, that's why it's truth. Yaakov is the center, Teferes is called Emes. Yaakov is the Midas Emes. Koilel b'chines vav k'tzavus, it contains all 6 directions. Hukav Amtsoy, which is the center. Das Teferes Yisod. So that's the vav. And that's called Israel, Yisrael. Yaakov, one of Yaakov's names was, Hashem gave him the name Yisrael. And that's why he's the Vav. V'zeh pirish ois emes kidu, as it is known. V'chelek hareviyis me Yisrael. And a quarter of Israel is what? That's Yesod, that's Yosef. Yosef is a quarter of Yaakov. Shenikra bris, which is called bris. And like it says, the shi'ura de gufa, the shear of the body, literally the physical size of the body. Arba brisis is the shear of 4. Because psychologically, spiritually, it's that way. It reflects in the body as well, that the shear of the bris is a quarter of the body. Have a b'shiur delay, isn't it shear? Ki gufa chagas. The body itself is chesed gevura teferes. The yesod nikra kanisha da kol nahirin. And yesod is called a gathering of all lights. Yesod doesn't have anything of its own, similar to Malchus. But Yesod is the gathering so that it can transmit. And what does it gather? It gathers from chesed, the energies of love, the energies of discipline, the energies of compassion. Stated by the Zohar, that the waters below the heaven, Shamayim is Chesed and Gevura, should all yikavu, should come into a mikveh, should come onto a gathering, that's Yesod. El Makom Echad, to the place of oneness, which is Yesod. Shehu Yesod, which is Yesod. Vahadas, but it's not enough for Yesod to just receive from Chesed Gevura Teferes. Because just receiving from Chesed Gevura Teferes gives him content, but doesn't give him the ability to connect to Malchus. The ability for him to take the content and connect it to Malchus and transmit comes from a power that's above the Midot, above the Chesed Gevura Teferes, comes from Das. So you have to add the Das. That's why it's in Yesod, there is Das, Chesed Gevura Teferes. And Yesod has all 4 of them. And that's why Yesod is called a quarter from Va'adas hu amispashit, b'chagas. And the Das extends into the Chesed Gevura Teferes, b'shvil tolda, for the sake of birth, for the sake of procreation. Kamosha Kosov, like it says, for Adam Yada, for Adam to have relations with Chava, the surgery was good. A piece of his rib was taken away. But for him to actually have intimacy with her, he had to know her. And that's the idea of Das. The sages say, in kushi kishui elaladas. There's no hardening, which simply means the ability for a person to have marital relations with his wife requires a certain das. When a person's mind is not there, when they're very, as we know, when a person is very anxious or then they can't physically get excited to be able to have a relationship. So there has to be a certain focus. That's the das. So you see, the das is a component for this intimacy, for this union. So you can have the emotions, the love, but it's not, if there's no focus where he's focusing on her and they're bonding, which creates that connection, which enables the actual transmission. So you have to say that in the body of the Zeir Anpin, there's sheer dalid yesoides, the sheer of the 4 yesoid neged dalid madregas, because the yesod has to receive from das, from chesed, from gevura, from teferes. Each one is an entire yesod, and then it gets concentrated into yesod, which is a quarter of it all, and to give das chagas. The netzach and the hod are not counted because hem levar magufa. They're already considered outside of the body. Ki yidu as it is known. So it's mainly these 4 components. V'zeu sha'amar, the bris iuroiva is a quarter b'shiyura de medida de gufa, of the measure of the body. When you separate the part that's going to be nishpa, it's going to go over to the recipient, mishiyura de gufa, from the rest of the body, shuhu vav, which is the vav, it's only a quarter. And that's reflected in the yud, shebesoifa gimmel, that's in the end of the gimmel, shenikra goimel dalim, that's actually gomel, is giving into the dal, bepoyel mamish in the literal sense, kaniskaliel, because only the bottom end of the gimmel is actually connecting to the dalid v'dalim. V'kula apik mi, and now the Zohar concludes, but all of this, including the roiva Yisrael, which is going to connect to the afar Yaakov, to the earth of Yaakov, which is the female, what's going to connect? The Rova Yisrael. All of it was developed by me. Now he's connecting the whole verse. The mi mana, that mi, which is this quintessential beginning, which can't even be considered a beginning, where the chachma of bina, which is so sublime and so a point of no differentiation, but since it's connecting already to the power of the differentiator, of the separator, from that point of connection, where non-beingness and beingness begins, this is where everything germinates, in this union of Chachma and Bina, this connection of Ayin and Yesh. At that point, you have already the idea. From there is where it germinates the whole process. The Bina, and from the Bina will come the 6 emotions, and it will also structure the female, and it will also structure the ability for the male and the female to unify and the creation to come into existence. The Mimana al Pikom Ashehigdam b'Mayim Razeh, based on everything that was prefaced in this teaching of the Zohar. First, he explained the root of the building of the nukva of the female, the Ze'er Anpin of the Ze'er Anpin, Shenikra Far Yaakov. It's called the dust or the dirt of Yaakov, the earth of Yaakov. We said before, Kamai Esther, like Esther, Karka Olam is considered earth, Kenis Galiyal. Liashoydish HaMalchus Rak Mebchinas Malchi Yois Tevav Ktsav is Dezak Yedua. Because the root of Malchus is only from the Malchus level of each. She's from the ribs of him. So she's created from the Malchus level of each. The Chesed has Malchus, the Gevurah has Malchus. So from the Malchus of all these Midot, which is called the Afar, that's Malchus created on her own. The source of the letters themselves. Then you need, however, the connection between the emotions and the letters. On that he said, me is what mana, which prepared Afar Yaakov. The miu asher heichen, he prepared the hizmin and got ready and readied la Afar Yaakov, the earth of Yaakov. Ki pirish mana lashon azmana means preparation. Kamay vayiman, as he said earlier. That's the chachma that's in bina, which is called me. Sha'az nikra bina me, the higher level of me. A me that you can't ask questions. Like it says, me madad, as it brings another verse where it says, me, who measured b'shi'oloi with his footsteps, mayim, water. The deeper meaning is not who, me, is this chachma that's in bina, madad, measured b'shi'oloi with his steps, because this is the point where the infinite and the finite have to converge. The beyond definition and definition starts. And they converge together and get married. So obviously there's idea of measuring, the measuring power, because if you don't measure over there, then everything is just infinite. So you need a very powerful force of constriction that's very applicable at that place. And that's the idea of madat. Over there, there's all the measurements. B'sha'olei mayim. Mayim is the flow of kindness, water. It has to be measured. V'shamayim bezeres. And the heavens have to be measured with the pinky. That means a very tach tikan. V'chen ksiv, and it says another pasuk, mi asaf ruach b'chafnav. Who gathered the wind b'chafnav in his hand scoop? That's referring to me. Chafan chagas tezah. That's the preparation of the chesed gevurah teferes of the Zeir Anpin. That's for whatever reason, that's called Ruach B'chafnaf. Not exactly sure why. Umi Heikim Kol Afsei Eretz. And who established all the ends of the earth? That's referring to the Netzach Hod Yesod element. They call the ends of the earth. Netzach Hod Yesod. He doesn't give much explanation on this, why each one is called for what it is. V'gam b'pchinas Roi v'Yisrael Amar. So now, after he says that me Mana Afar Yaakov, that me is responsible for Malchus, now he says also for Yesod, that me orchestrated and created a perfect mashpia, a perfect influencer for the recipient, a perfect husband for Malchus, for this beautiful vessel. That all the hashpa'ah, all the particles, all the, in that seminal drop that the Ze'er Anpin is going to give to Malchus is such a rich, all the nutrients for all of existence, all time and space. So it's only a quarter, but it is that's going from him to her, and then she's going to process it and filter, and only a little bit is going to continue on into the creation. But who is going to, like we know that only one cell of the man's seed is what reaches the eggs and fertilizes the eggs. So, but yet But all these mispar, all the number of all this rich transmission, who prepared it? All me. Hanimshach mi yesod d'chura, that's drawn from the yesod element of the male. Hanikra roiva Yisrael, which is called the quarter of Israel. Canal hakol apik me. All of it was emerged from me on Iskaliyah. Like it says, hamoitzi b'mispar, that Hashem, God, the level called me, brings forth b'mispar, in a number. That's why it says mispar, because since it's only a quarter, already over here there has to be already an element of number, because it has to be finite bursts of energy being given to create a finite universe. And that's why it has the idea of a number. Tzivah, it says God takes out with a set number the hosts of heaven. Uksivin, it says in other words, Moina mispar, Hashem counts a number l'kachavim to the stars. Simply means he counts the stars. A deeper meaning, the stars are these the cells, if you can call them, that are in the seminal drop that's being given from the Yesod to Malchus. Because they're called koich ve'or, they're masculine points of light, powerful energies. Shen oiros chasadim, these are the lights of chesed, the Yesod dezah, from the Yesod element of Zeir Anpin, shenikra koich ve'or, they're called stars of light, or koich ve'boiker, that's something that's called the stars of morning, ki yadu as it is known. And the general intention is all the details of all the lights that are coming the Yesod Zu from the male, from the Yesod element of Zeir Anpin, Lin Nukva to the female, Shenikra Far Yaakov, that's called the earth of Yaakov, Hakol Ba, it's all coming B'mida U'mispar. It's all under a powerful measuring element, which is on the level of me, as we spoke earlier, that all counts it all. Because if not, it would overwhelm the system. You can't overwhelm the system, so it all has to be measured by that initial estimator that estimates it all at the very, 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 very germinating point of existence. Umispar mepchinas mi de bina shasham kava mida, because in the mi of bina there is the measuring element. Kamashakasa mi madad, that mi is measuring, as we spoke earlier. Ukamaimer, and as we also say, choykes man nasan lahem. When we say in Kiddush Levan, it says that God puts a limit and a time to everything. He doesn't leave the world unmeasured and unlimited. However, he says, in Malchus it's called mana. Mana means prepared, but mana also means counted. And so mi mana, who counted Afar Yaakov, the dust of Yaakov, and umispar, and can count Roiva Yisrael. So he's going to now say another knech, another point. Malchus, once the energy comes into Malchus, it's already far more fixed. It's already literally countable. It has a measure. In the flow of energy as it's coming from the mashpia, it's a source of number, but not really number yet. It's still the final extension of the infinite. So by Rova Yisrael, by the Yesod, he says mispar, which mispar, again, I'm not exactly sure. Mispar still means it's like a source of number, but not yet number. Manam, davar shebeminyan, minyan means already a fixed count. So he says, should be Yesod Zeir Anpin, in the Yesod of the Zeir Anpin, when it's still in the Mashpia Nikra Mispar, it's called number. Liyos Makoira Riba says, it could be, it's like, even just I was in the sperm coming from a male to a woman. The woman, she has an egg, one egg, I think, right? And she needs, so she, what's it called? And then in the end, she's pregnant. How many children does she have? So every woman, she has 2 children, 1 child, 2, 3. This woman now in Africa, that she had 9 children. Okay, so the woman who had 18 children, Kanaina Hara, not in one shot, but okay. It's enough, it's a very countable number. The sperm that's coming from the man, how much children could there be? I was once saw some kind of a documentary on this idea. It's like millions of potential children. And only one, they all die on the way, literally, on the way out from the man to the woman. It's scary, it's like a Holocaust. Millions of potential children die, and then there's that one that makes it to the sperm to fertilize the egg. But you see that over there's no number to the force, and this is the same idea in the cosmic flow. In the energy force, as it's coming from the male element, it's like infinite universes. It's endless, and only one droplet makes it into Malchus. So over there, it's already numbered. Over there, it's called real number. It's already counted. That in Chok, in Malchus is called Chok, it's already fully counted. But in Asapra, I will illuminate to Chok, like we spoke a few weeks ago in the Maimon. I want to go over it now. Mone Mispar. Mone is more fixed. Mispar is less fixed. Now we're going to connect it all to this week's parsha, because I was a little frustrated that we're learning all this Chassidus, but it's not connected to the parsha. But now it's connected to the parsha. This parsha is the parsha of Bamidbar, and the parsha of Bamidbar is the first opening Torah portion in the book of Numbers. Why is it called Numbers? Because in the beginning it begins with the numbers of who? The numbers of the Jewish people. It's called the book of counting. The sages refer to it as the book of counting, because the Jewish people are counted. That's what we read in a census is taken and the Jews are counted. How many? 600,000 Jews, whatever, and some change. But then we read the Haftorah, the portion of the Navi, of the prophets, the opening, this week's parsha, this week's Haftorah, we will read, and it makes an interesting prediction. It says, V'hoya mispar b'nei Yisrael, and the number of the Jewish people will be asher lo yisafer, that cannot be counted. It's talking about the future. The Jewish people will increase so much that you won't be able to be counted. Like God told Abraham that your children won't be able to be counted. It will finally be come to fulfillment in the days of Moshiach, where there will be numerous, literally too many to count. Why is that? Didn't we say that there is a certain measure that represents a flow of the infinite? Didn't we say that me serves as this very, very stringent restrictor that creates the design of creation and sets a limit? Till Moshiach, yeah. Once the days of Moshiach, we will open up as a result of the mitzvah connection we've done. We will connect the universe and creation to the pre-measure, to the pre-filter, and at that moment, and creation will be ready to receive from the infinite. And as a result of that, the first thing that's going to happen is that the Jewish people, the population, will explode to beyond numbers, and from that infinity, it will bring that infinity into creation as well. So yes, there's a fixed amount now, but since we're dealing with a communication between the infinite and the finite, at that time the infinite will dominate. Now the finite dominates in keeping a fixed, keeping the population growth in check. But at that point, it will be removed, as we'll see. The number of the Bnei Yisrael will be kachol layam, like the sand of the sea. Asher lo yisafer, that can't be counted. Ki mispar Yisrael hanal lo yeh b'medida. Now it is measured, then it won't be measured. V'zeu pshuta shel mikra. And that's actually the simple meaning. That's the meaning of the Haftorah of this week, but it's also the simple meaning of the words mi mana afar Yaakov, who can count. We translated according to the secret, mi mana counts. It's the opposite. Umispar, and sets a number for the Rova Yisrael, for this transmission, male transmission. That's a secret meaning. But the simple meaning is who can count? And he says both are true. In these days, me, the level me, mana, sets a count for Afar Yaakov and for Rova Yisrael. But, which is a semi-count. But when Mashiach will come, mi mana, that's what Bilam was seeing. Who will count? Because it won't have a number. Mi mana Afar Yaakov, when they will be like the sand of the sea, beligvul, without an end. Mishum shelo yeh mispar, there won't be a number, to the divine influence into the world will come without a number. The number of the Jewish people that was already measured in the past, but when in Moshiach's days it will be b'chinas ein sof, it will be in a level of infinite, b'li mispar, without a number. Not measured and not counted. Why? Because we do God's will. And when you do His will, you connect to Him as He transcends the entire realm of measurement. Because will is from Keter. Keser is infinite. We create His will from a place even beyond will. I made a mistake. Not from the level that we reach His will. We transcend even will. And over there is beyond the entire source of measuring. Shenikra Sofer. The Kavamida, this is called Sofer, the scribe, because a scribe, creates words, systemize, creates certain limit. And this is called beyond the scribe. Kamashakos of Aye Sofer. Ikidua bein gimmel dvarim Sefer v'Sefer v'Sipur. Before Echad, what are you counting? It's higher than count the number. Stated elsewhere, it is enough for those who understand. So somehow we're supposed to understand all of this. Quite an accomplishment. Took us 5 weeks, 5 study sessions, but we went through it. The main thing is we should already fulfill this blessing. There should be already a flood of light and a flood of godliness in the world. The beauty of Israel, the beauty of the Jewish people, and should be able to be appreciated in the whole world. The enemies of Hashem, the enemies of holiness, the enemies of godliness should disintegrate instantly. And we should see all the light that we've been waiting for all this time. That even the biggest anti-Semite, Bilaam, when he said prophecy and he looked at Israel, he could only see the good. May the eyes of all of humanity change, and everybody should see the Jewish people and the Jewish contribution in the same way Bilaam saw it, and suddenly say, wow. Well, what were we thinking? May all of this come to fruition with the birth of Moshiach and the revelation of Moshiach now, and now. Thank you.